You wake in the grey hour before sunrise, when the world is still and colourless and the only boundary between sleep and waking is the slow recognition of the thatch above you. The cottage holds the night's coolness, a gentle chill that rests on your face and hands, while the rest of you stays warm beneath the wool blanket. No sudden movement pulls you from the bed. Instead, you lie there for a time, letting the dark shapes of the room settle into their familiar places. The low table, the stool pushed against the wall, the dark mouth of the hearth where last night's embers still breathe a faint orange glow. The window is a small square cut into the east wall, covered with oiled linen that turns the coming day into a soft grey smear. That smear is the first sign you notice, a gradual lightening that seems to happen without haste, as if the sun itself is still half asleep. You push the blanket aside and sit up, and the wooden bed frame answers with a single quiet creak, a sound so ordinary that it barely registers. Your bare feet meet the packed earth floor, which is cool and smooth and slightly uneven where years of treading have worn shallow dips. The motion of rising is old and automatic, a chain of small gestures that require no thought. Stand, stretch your arms once, reach for the woolen tunic draped over the footboard, pull it over your head, and let the weight of it settle around you. The tunic smells faintly of wood smoke and lime dust, the two scents that live in every fibre of your working life, and they mingle now with the clean, earthy smell of the cottage itself. You light a taper from the embers and touch it to the wick of a clay lamp, and a small flame opens a pool of yellow light around the hearth. The water in the clay jug is cool from the night. You pour some into a small iron pot and set it among the stirred coals, watching the surface begin to shiver before the first tiny bubbles appear. While the water warms, you take down your leather apron from its peg by the door, a heavy piece of cowhide, darkened by years of lime and labor, and you run your thumb over a worn spot near the hem, feeling the soft, almost velvety texture that comes from constant handling. You hang it over your shoulder for now and turn back to the fire, where the water is just beginning to steam. Into a clay cup you sprinkle a few pinches of crushed barley, then pour the hot water over them, and the smell rises at once, nutty and mild and comforting. You drink standing, the cup held in both hands, and the warmth travels down into your chest and spreads outward through your limbs. Outside, the first bird stirs, a single call that sounds like a question, and then another answers from farther away, and then a general murmur of half-awake chirping weaves itself into the silence without breaking it. You finish the barley water, rinse the cup with a splash from the jug, and set it on the table to dry. Now the apron goes on properly. You loop the strap over your neck, settle the weight across your chest, and tie the side strings behind your back with a knot that your fingers know perfectly. The wooden rake that leans beside the door is your next companion. Its handle is long and smooth, worn pale where your hands grip it each day, and the crosspiece at the end is stained a permanent grey-white from the lime pits. You lift it, test its familiar balance with a slight shift of your wrist, and then you open the door. The morning air meets you all at once, cool and damp and full of the scent of wet grass, and beneath that the faint, distant tang of smoke from the town's waking chimneys. You step outside and close the door behind you, and for a moment you simply stand there, letting your eyes adjust to the wide, soft light of early dawn. The sky overhead is a smooth pearl grey, deepening to a pale slate where the last of the night still lingers, but above the eastern hills, A band of lighter gold is just beginning to show, a promise that will be fulfilled slowly. Your cottage sits a little apart, outside the town wall, with a stretch of rough meadow between you and the gate, and the path that leads to the lime pits begins right at your doorstep, a narrow track pressed into the grass by years of your own passing. You walk. The grass on either side is heavy with dew, each blade tipped with a tiny droplet that catches the growing light, and as you brush past, your wooden clogs come away wet and dark. The rake handle rests across your shoulder, and with every step you feel its slight bounce, a gentle rhythm that matches your stride. The path takes you past a small stand of alder trees, their leaves still and dark, and then it curves along the edge of a rye field where the grain stands waist high and silvered with moisture. Nothing moves in the field except the slow drift of mist that pulls in the low places, thin and white and shallow enough that you can see through it to the green beneath. You pass through one of these mist pools, and the air grows cooler for a few paces, carrying a clean, earthy smell like damp stone, and then you emerge into clear air again, and the world opens up. The town wall appears on your right, a long curve of grey stone that follows the rise of the land. It is old and lichened, with patches of pale green and rust orange spreading across the blocks, like a slow map of time. You walk parallel to it without needing to look, the same way a mill stream follows its channel, and after a while the dark shape of the gate comes into view. The gate is a heavy timber door bound with iron straps, still closed at this hour, and above it a single lantern burns, a steady yellow point that looks almost warm against the cold stone. No watchman calls out, no cart waits. The gate will open later, when the sun is fully above the hills, and then the town will spill its sounds outward, but for now it is a silent wall, holding a sleeping world. You leave the wall behind as the path angles away across the last stretch of meadow, and soon you see the lime pits ahead, a level area where the ground has been cleared and flattened. The 3 pits lie in a row, each a long rectangle of unmortared stone set into the earth, and they are covered with heavy linen cloths weighted at the corners with rounded stones. Beside them stands the open shelter, a simple structure of 4 wooden posts supporting a thatched roof, and under that roof are the beam, the draining frame, the water barrel, the pile of oak bark, the buckets, the lime bin, all the quiet tools of your trade arranged in an order that never changes. A pale dust of dried lime whitens the ground around the pits, so that the earth there looks frosted even in summer, and the air carries the clean, sharp scent of slaked lime, a smell like crushed chalk after rain. You stop at the edge of the first pit, set the rake against the shelter post, and stand for a moment just breathing. The hides have been soaking for 4 days now, and you know without looking that the hair is beginning to loosen, but you look anyway because that is part of the ritual. You stoop and lift the linen cover, folding it back carefully so that the stones do not roll into the pit, and the lime water appears beneath, a pale milky grey, perfectly still except for a faint shimmer where the light touches it. Under the surface you can see the darker outlines of the hides, heavy and shapeless, resting one atop another like creatures in hibernation. A few small bubbles cling to the edges, the only visible sign of the slow chemistry at work. You watch for a minute, 2 minutes, and nothing changes, which is exactly as it should be. You move to the second pit and uncover it in the same way. Then the third. The hides in the third pit are newer, only 2 days in the lime, and the liquor there is cloudier and sharper, making your nose tingle slightly when you lean close. You leave that cover open a little longer, letting the air move over the surface, and then you return to the first pit and take up the rake. Stirring is a gentle art. You lower the crosspiece into the water and begin a slow circular motion, not splashing, barely breaking the surface, just enough to make the hides shift and turn. The water moves in lazy ripples that spread outward and bump softly against the stone edges. 10 circles one way, and the hides roll over each other with a heavy, underwater grace. Then 10 circles the other way, and they settle again into stillness. You repeat the stirring at the second pit, then the third, and by the time you finish the sun has climbed enough to touch the tops of the alders with a pale gold light. The mist is thinning now, pulling back toward the brook and the low ground, and the meadow is beginning to emerge in full color, the deep green of the grass, the paler silver green of the rye, the dark brown of the path you walked. A crow calls from the town wall, a single rough note, and you watch it launch itself into the air and glide down to the field, a black shape against the brightening sky. You set the rake aside and walk to the water barrel, where you lift the wooden lid and dip the ladle that floats inside. The water is cool and tastes faintly of oak, and you drink slowly, feeling it wash the last sleep from your throat. You pour a little over your hands to rinse away the lime dust that has settled on your fingers, and you dry them on the coarse cloth tied to your apron string, a cloth that is itself stiff with old lime. The draining frame draws your attention next, a wide, sloped board of planks that stands at the edge of the shelter. Later in the week you will lift the hides from the first pit and lay them here to drip, but only when they are ready, and readiness is not a thing you rush. For now you simply check that the frame is clean, running your hand over the wood to feel for any roughness. You find a small crust of dried lime scale along the lower edge, and you chip it away with a flat stone, letting the white flakes fall to the ground. The stone makes a soft scraping sound, and the lime dust puffs up in a tiny cloud and settles. You brush the frame clean with your palm, and the wood is smooth and ready. From the shelter, you can see the whole working ground, and you take a moment to look at it all as the morning brightens. The 3 pits lie in their row, the water in each a slightly different shade of grey-white, depending on the strength of the lime and the age of the hides. The linen covers that you have folded back hang like soft curtains over the stone edges. The tools lean in their places, the rake, the paddle, the long hook, the blunt scraping knife hanging from a peg, the pile of oak bark, which will later become the tanning liquor, sits under its own small cover, smelling sweet and astringent and woodsy. Everything is in order, an order that asks nothing from you but presence and patience. You go to the 3rd pit again and use the paddle to push down one hide that has risen a little at one corner, its edge breaking the surface like a slow whale. The paddle slips under it, you press gently, and the hide sinks back into the grey-white milk with a soft gulp of air. The lime liquor in this pit is still strong. You can tell by the way it clings to the paddle and leaves a faint, prickling sensation on the skin of your wrist where a drop has landed. You rinse the paddle in the water bucket and return it to its place. The sun is fully up now, though still low, and the day begins to gather its warmth. The dew on the grass is shrinking, the droplets evaporating into a thin haze that hangs just above the meadow. You can hear the first real sounds from the town, the distant clang of the gate being unbarred. a heavy thud that echoes off the stone walls, and then the murmur of voices, the creak of a cart, the bark of a dog. The world on the other side of the wall is waking up, but here on the tanner's ground the quiet holds. No one comes out to the pits at this hour. Your only visitors are the crow and a pair of sparrows that have nested in the shelter's thatch, and even they move with a quiet, flitting patience. You sit on the wooden bench under the shelter, and from this seat you can observe everything without needing to move. The bench is a simple plank on two stumps, worn smooth by sitting, and you settle onto it with the ease of long habit. Your hands rest on your knees, and your breathing slows into a rhythm that matches the stillness around you. The hide soak. The lime works. A butterfly, pale yellow and small, floats across the pits and lands on the edge of the second one, opening and closing its wings with a slowness that seems to measure time in a different scale. You watch it without thought, and after a while it lifts off and drifts away toward the alders. You notice then that a single strand of spider silk is stretched between two posts of the shelter, invisible until the sun catches it, and it sways in a breeze so light you cannot feel it on your skin. You take out the egg and the string from their clay cup on the shelf. The egg test is simple. You lower the egg gently into the first pit until it floats, and you note how much of the shell remains above the surface. A circle the size of a small coin means the lime strength is right, not too caustic, not too spent. Today the egg shows that same small circle, the same as yesterday, and you lift it out, rinse it in the bucket, and dry it on the cloth before returning it to its cup. The second pit gives the same result, while the third, fresher pit makes the egg float higher, showing a wider patch of shell, which tells you that the liquor there is still aggressive and will need more time to mellow. You store this knowledge without writing it down. It will be part of tomorrow's checking and the day after's, a slow accumulation of small observations that guide your hands. A slight hunger begins to make itself known, a gentle hollow feeling rather than a sharp demand. You walk to the shelter's corner where your food bundle waits, a square of coarse cloth tied with string, and you carry it back to the bench. Inside there is dark rye bread and a small wedge of hard cheese, and you eat slowly, breaking off pieces of bread and cheese and letting them rest on your tongue before you chew. The bread is dense and slightly sour, the cheese sharp and crumbly, and a taste of the cool morning even though the day is warming. You drink more water from the ladle, and then you wrap what remains and set it back in its place for midday. The morning stretches on in this way, without event. You walk the perimeter of the working ground, a path you have walked so many times that your feet know every dip and stone. You check the thatch of the shelter for any loose straw, finding none. You lift the lid of the lime bin and peer at the lumps of quicklime inside, white and chalky and dry, and you make a mental note that more will need to be slaked before the next moon, though not yet. You run your hand along the beam, feeling the subtle curve worn into the oak by years of scraping, a hollow that fits the work like a mold. The beam is cool and smooth, and it waits. By the time the sun is halfway up the sky, the shadows have shortened, and the light has lost its early gold, turning to a clear, steady white. You take the rake once more and stir all three pits again, a second gentle turning that serves no urgent purpose except to keep the hides from settling unevenly and to give you something useful to do. The ripples spread and fade, the hides roll and settle, and the surface returns to stillness, reflecting now the pale blue of the sky and the soft white shapes of the clouds that have begun to form above the hills. Those clouds are small and round and perfectly motionless, the sort that promise a dry day and a mild night. You stand at the edge of the first pit, leaning on the rake handle, and let your gaze travel across the meadow to the town wall and beyond, to the rooftops just visible over the stone. A thin column of smoke rises from the bakehouse, and another from the smithy, and the distant ring of a hammer on iron reaches you a moment later, softened by distance into something almost musical. A cart moves slowly along the road outside the gate, and you watch its progress without curiosity, a simple tracking of motion across the landscape. Then you turn away, back to the pits, back to the shelter, back to the small quiet territory that is yours. The morning has passed, though you could not say when the passing happened. The hides are a little looser in their lime bath, the water a little warmer, the day a little older, and you are still here, a still figure in a quiet corner of the world, holding the slow rhythm of the work as steadily as the earth holds the stones. The morning comes again, quiet and grey, and you are already at the pits before the sun has cleared the alders. The walk from the cottage was the same as yesterday and the day before, a track worn into the grass by your own feet, and the dampness of the night still clings to the lower leaves of the rye. You carry the wooden paddle under your arm, its blade broad and smooth and stained a permanent chalky white from seasons of lime, and the weight of it is as familiar as your own hand. The linen covers over the pits are dark with moisture, heavy with the dew that settled in the small hours, and they hang still, no wind to stir them. You pause at the edge of the working ground, taking in the whole scene with a slow sweeping look, the 3 pits in their stone frames, the open shelter dark under its thatch, the crow already perched on the dead branch of the ash tree at the meadow's edge, and the pale dust of lime that powders everything like a light frost. Nothing has moved, nothing has changed, and the stillness settles into you like a second skin. You set the paddle against the corner post of the shelter and begin with the first pit, the one that holds the hides longest in the lime. Stooping, you lift the cornerstones one at a time, placing them carefully on the ground beside your foot, and the linen cover comes away with a soft, wet sound, peeling from the stone rim where the lime has crusted it into a temporary seal. The liquor beneath is the color of thin milk, grey-white and opaque, and the surface shimmers faintly as the air touches it. You fold the cover back in slow, deliberate stages, letting the water's reflection play across the underside of the cloth, and then you stand and look down into the pit. The hides lie in layers, shapeless and heavy, their outlines blurred by the lime solution, and you can see that the hair on the uppermost hide has begun to lift in small dark patches, leaving the pale grain of the skin exposed like new wood under stripped bark. That is the sign you look for, the quiet signal that the lime has done its slow work, and you note it without excitement, simply tucking the knowledge away for the day when you will draw them out. You move to the second pit and repeat the uncovering, lifting the stones, peeling back the cover, folding it neatly over the edge. The liquor here is a shade darker, more pearl grey, and the hides are still firm with no hair slipping yet, which tells you they need more days. The third pit is last, and its cover comes away more easily because it was only laid the day before. The lime solution there is still sharp and new, with a slight heat that you can feel rising when you lean close, a faint prickle on your cheeks. You leave all three covers open now, and the morning air begins to move across the surfaces, carrying away the trapped smell of wet stone and old protein. A smell that is not unpleasant but clean and mineral, like a cave. The paddle is in your hand again, and you approach the first pit to begin the turning. Turning is a slow, patient motion that you have done so many times it feels less like work than like a part of the day's breathing. You slide the blade of the paddle under the edge of the topmost hide, feeling the resistance of the water and the weight of the soaked skin, and then you lift gently, not fighting but guiding, until a corner breaks the surface. Lime water sheets off the hide in smooth curtains, running back into the pit with a sound like a small stream over stones, and you pause there, letting the hide drain for a moment before you ease it over. The hide rolls, heavy and slow, its own weight carrying it into a new position, and the surface of the pit rocks with a lazy swell that laps against the stone edges and then subsides. You work your way down through the layers, finding each hide's edge with the paddle, lifting, pausing, rolling, and the motion sets a rhythm that your body settles into as easily as walking. No two hides feel exactly the same. Some are thicker and resist more, some are already soft and pliable from the lime, and you adjust the angle of the paddle without thinking, reading the resistance through the wood, as if it were an extension of your arm. When the first pit is turned, you wipe the paddle on the coarse cloth at your apron and move to the second. The hides here are stiffer, the lime less advanced, and the turning requires a little more patience, because the skins still cling together in places where the hair is not loosened. You work the paddle between them with a gentle rocking motion, separating them one from another, and the water gulps softly as air escapes from the folds. A single bubble rises from deep in the pile, domes the surface for a moment, and then vanishes with a tiny popping sound that seems too small to hear, yet you do hear it in the quiet. The hides shift and settle, and you go around the pit once more to be sure they are all free, then move on. The third pit is the most alive of the three. The fresh lime has not yet spent its first sharpness, and when you dip the paddle, you feel a slight warmth through the wood, a ghost of the chemical reaction that is still unfolding below. The hides here are new only a few days in, and they are still dark with hair and stiff with the memory of the animal. Turning them is a matter of simple patience, because they will not be ready for many days yet, and you handle them with the same care but a different expectation, knowing that the lime is only beginning its work on the protein bonds that hold the hair and the epidermis tight. You lift, pause, roll, repeat, and the paddle makes a soft knocking sound against the stone side of the pit each time you angle it to free a corner, a dull wooden note that is swallowed immediately by the open air. By the time all three pits are turned, the sun is fully up and the light has changed from grey to a thin, watery gold that makes the lime dust on the ground sparkle faintly, as if the earth were scattered with tiny grains of glass. You set the paddle aside and walk a slow circuit around the pits, looking at each from a different angle, checking that the covers are still folded back neatly and that no hide is caught on a rough edge of stone. The lime pits are old, older than your own years at this trade, and the stones that line them have worn smooth in the centers from decades of rubbing by hides and tools, while the upper rims are still rough and crusted with white deposits that build like coral. In one place a small tuft of moss has found a foothold between the stones, bright green against all the grey and white, and you see it anew each morning as if it were a small gift left just for you. You go to the water barrel, lift the lid, and fill the wooden ladle. The water is cool and tastes of the oak staves, and you drink slowly, letting your gaze travel across the meadow to the town wall. The gate is open now, and the sounds of the waking town drift over, the clatter of a wooden yoke, the lowing of an ox, the murmur of voices, too far away to separate into words. A thin column of smoke rises from the bakehouse chimney, and you watch it climb straight up until it meets a layer of still air, and spreads sideways into a flat haze. The crow on the ash branch ruffles its feathers and settles again, and a second crow glides in to join it, landing with a soft flurry of wings. The two birds sit in silence, their black shapes sharp against the pale sky, and they watch the meadow with the same patient stillness that you bring to the pits. You return to the first pit and kneel beside it, close enough that you can smell the lime with each breath. The aroma is sharp, but not harsh, a clean mineral scent like rain on crushed limestone, and beneath it there is a faint, animal undertone that speaks of the hides themselves, a whisper of their origin that the lime is slowly erasing. You reach down and touch the surface of the liquor with one fingertip, barely breaking the tension, and the lime water feels slippery, almost oily, though it is only water and calcium hydroxide and dissolved proteins. A tiny ripple spreads outward from your finger and dies against the stone, and you pull your hand back, wipe it on your apron, and stand. The morning moves into its middle hours without hurry. You take the long-handled hook from its place and walk to the first pit, where you test the hair on the topmost hide by catching a small tuft with the hook and pulling gently. The hair comes away in a dark, wet clump, leaving a patch of clean, pale skin beneath, and you let it drop into a wooden bucket that you keep for this purpose. You work your way across the hide, testing in several places, and each time the hair releases with the same soft, reluctant give, like pulling dead grass from wet soil. The bucket slowly fills with the dark, sodden hair, and when you are done you carry it to the waste pit at the edge of the working ground, a shallow hollow where you dump the spent hair and the scrapings from fleshing, and where the crows sometimes come to pick through for anything useful. You tip the bucket, and the hair slides out in a heavy, wet mass that settles with a soft squelch. Then you return the bucket to its place and rinse your hands in the water bucket. The sun climbs higher, and the shadows shorten until they are just dark pools directly beneath the posts of the shelter. You feel a slight warmth on your neck now, the first real heat of the day, and you loosen the neck of your tunic a little to let the air move. The lime pits begin to give off a faint visible steam where the warmer air meets the cool surface of the liquor, thin wisps that curl and vanish before they can rise more than a hand's breadth. You watch this for a time, the ghost-like vapor that marks the boundary between the hidden work below and the open air above, and the motion of it is hypnotic, a gentle, ceaseless stirring that asks nothing of you. The paddle is in your hand again, though you did not consciously decide to take it up. Your body has its own memory of the day's rhythm, and the second turning of the morning is part of that rhythm. You work the first pit again, though less thoroughly this time, just a gentle stirring to ensure that no hide has settled into a position where the lime cannot reach some folded corner. The paddle circles through the grey-white water, and the hides turn with a slow underwater grace, their own buoyancy making the work light. You pause often, leaning on the paddle and looking out across the meadow, where a flock of starlings has landed in the rye, and their collective murmur reaches you as a soft, liquid chattering. The starlings rise as one, wheel in a dark cloud that twists and folds like a single creature, and settle again farther away, and the rye quivers from their passing, and then go still. You repeat the stirring in the second pit, and then the third, and each time the lime water catches the light in a different way. The first pit reflects the pale blue of the sky, the second mirrors the green of the alder trees, and the third, with its fresh liquor, is a flat, milky white that refuses to reflect anything. You notice these things without comment, letting them pass through your mind like clouds, and you wipe the paddle clean and return it to its place against the shelter post. The cloth you use for wiping is stiff with dried lime, and you beat it once against the post to knock away the worst of the crust, a small puff of white dust blooming and then settling. The day has reached its midpoint, and the light is steady and flat, the shadows having disappeared almost entirely. You fetch your food bundle from the shelter and sit on the bench, the same plank on two stumps that has held you through so many meals. The rye bread is drier now, the cheese softer from the warming air, and you eat with the same slow, unthinking pace that marks everything you do here. A small brown beetle makes its way across the toe of your clog while you sit, and you watch it trace a meandering path over the leather and down to the ground, where it disappears into a crack in the dried earth. The crows have left the ash branch, and the sky is empty except for the high, faint circle of a hawk that hangs on the thermals without moving its wings. After eating, you walk the perimeter of the working ground, a slow patrol that you perform not because anything is wrong, but because the motion itself is a way of passing the time while the lime does its work. You check the condition of the shelter's thatch, pressing a palm against a spot where a few straws have shifted, and you decide it will hold for another season. You test the ropes that hold the draining frame, pulling on each one to feel the tension, and they are all sound. You count the pieces of oak bark in the pile, not to know the number, but to see how quickly you were using them, and you judge that there is enough for the next batch of tanning liquor when the hides are ready. Every small check is a stitch in the fabric of the day, holding the hours together. You stop at the edge of the first pit and kneel again, this time to feel the temperature of the lime water with the back of your wrist. It is cool, cooler than the air now that the sun has warmed the day, and that tells you the pit is deep enough that the earth's own coolness keeps the liquor stable. You submerge your hand a little further, just to feel the slippery texture of the water against your skin, and then you withdraw it and wipe it dry. The hair on the hides is looser now than it was this morning, and you can see a few more patches where the pale grain shows through, spreading slowly like a slow-rising tide. Tomorrow there will be more patches, and the day after that, enough that you will draw the hides and begin the scraping. But that is tomorrow, and today is still only half spent. The afternoon settles in, and with it comes a drowsy stillness that seems to weigh on everything. The birds fall silent, the air grows heavy, and even the lime pits seem to hold their breath, the surface of the liquor turning glassy and undisturbed. You sit on the bench under the shelter and let your own breathing slow, not sleeping but resting, your hands folded on your lap and your eyes half closed. The smell of the lime mingles with the sweet, dry scent of the oak bark and the faint, green odor of the meadow, and together they form a single, stable perfume that you breathe in and out without thought. A fly buzzes somewhere in the thatch, a low, steady drone that climbs and falls and eventually fades into silence. When you open your eyes fully, the light has shifted again, tilting toward the afternoon's long descent. You rise, stretch your arms once, and take up the paddle for the final turning of the day. The motion is the same as it was this morning, and the same as it will be tomorrow. The slide of the blade under the hide, the lift against the water's resistance, the slow roll that sends ripples spreading across the pit. You work through all 3 pits with the same care, and by the time you finish, the shadows have begun to stretch out from the shelter posts, long fingers of darkness pointing eastward across the meadow. The day is winding down, and you feel the change in the air, a slight coolness that rises from the ground as the sun's warmth begins to fade. You fold the linen covers back over the pits, laying them out smooth and weighting the corners with the stones. The stones are cool and round and fit into your palm as neatly as the paddle does, and you set them in place one by one, pressing down to make a good seal. The pits are covered for the night, and the lime will continue its work in the dark, unattended, as it always does. You rinse the paddle in the water bucket, hang it in its place, and empty the bucket onto the ground, where the earth is already white and packed hard. The crow returns to its branch and settles with a final flutter, and the sky in the west begins to show the first hint of color, a pale wash of apricot just above the hills. You stand for a moment at the edge of the working ground, looking back at the covered pits, the dark shelter, the tools all in their places. Everything is ready for the night, and the quiet of the evening is a deeper quiet than the morning's, filled with the sense of completion. You turn and walk the path back toward the cottage, the rake handle not on your shoulder this time, your step slower than it was at dawn. The grass has lost its dew and springs back softly under your clogs. The town gate is still open, but the sounds from within have quieted to a low murmur. As you reach your door, you pause and look back once more. The 3 lime pits are just darker shapes in the gathering dusk, patient and still, holding their slow transformation in the cool embrace of the stone. Then you go inside, and the day settles into memory. The day has come when the first pit is ready to yield its hides. You know this not by any sudden sign, but by the gradual accumulation of small signals that your eyes have been tracking for days, the way the hair slips free with the barest touch of the hook, the softened weight of the skins when you stir them, and the particular milky color of the lime water that tells you the liquor has spent its strength on the fibers and is now a thin, exhausted gray. This morning, when you uncover the pit, the linen comes away without sticking, and the surface of the water is calm and opaque, a gray so pale it is almost white, with a faint iridescence where the light catches it. You stand for a moment looking down at the dark, shapeless forms of the hides beneath, and then you go to fetch the long-handled hook from its place against the shelter post. The hook is an old tool, its wooden shaft worn to a smooth polish by the grip of your hands and those of the tanners before you, and the iron tip is darkened with age except at the very point where it gleams from constant use. You carry it back to the first pit and lay it across the stone rim, and then you remove the cornerstones from the cover and fold the linen back entirely, leaving the pit open to the sky. A faint steam rises from the lime water as the cool morning air meets it, thin wisps that curl and vanish, and the smell of wet lime and soaked hide lifts into the quiet. You are not in a hurry. The hides have waited in their bath for more than a week, and another hour will make no difference. You take up the hook and lower it slowly into the pit, feeling with the tip until it catches the edge of the uppermost hide. The contact travels up the shaft as a soft, blunt pressure, and you angle the hook to get a firm hold without tearing. Then you pull gently, and the hide comes up through the water with a deep, liquid reluctance, as if the pit itself is unwilling to let it go. The surface of the lime water breaks open around the emerging skin, and the cascade of grey-white liquor runs off in sheets that slap softly back into the pit, making a sound like a bucket being poured from a low height. You lift steadily, using your legs and not just your arms, and the hide rises until it hangs from the hook, heavy and dripping, its full weight pulling against your grip. A drop of lime water falls onto your clog and leaves a small, wet circle that will dry into a white ring before the morning is out. You carry the hide, suspended from the hook, the few steps to the draining board. The board is a long, sloped plank of oak, worn smooth and stained the color of old bone, and it leans against a wooden trestle so that its lower end hangs just over the edge of the pit. Any water that runs off will find its way back into the lime bath, and nothing is wasted. You lower the hide onto the board, letting it slump into a wet, shapeless pile, and then you work the hook free with a gentle twist. The hide settles, and a thin stream of lime water immediately begins to creep down the slope of the board, following the grain of the wood in tiny, meandering channels that join and divide and join again. You watch for a moment as the first, largest puddle drains away, and then you turn back to the pit for the next hide. The second hide comes up more easily because it lies at an angle that lets the hook slide under its edge without searching. You pull it free, and again the lime water cascades, and again you step across to the draining board and lay the new hide beside the first, though you arrange it so that the water can run freely from both without one blocking the other. The board is wide enough for 3 hides at a time, and you know by the count of what you put into the pit that there are 7 in total, each one a full cowhide that you remember trimming and cleaning before the soaking began. The memory of those preparations is distant now, as if the lime has erased not just the hair, but the time between. And you think of it only as you might think of a path you have walked many times without detail, just a sense of familiarity. By the time the third hide is on the board, the first 2 have slowed their dripping to a steady, rhythmic patter, 1 drop every few seconds, each drop striking the stone rim of the pit with a tiny, sharp sound that is the only punctuation in the morning's long silence. You leave the 3 hides to drain and go to the water barrel, where you rinse the hook clean of lime and wipe it dry with the coarse cloth. Then you sit on the bench for a moment, letting your breathing slow, and you look out across the meadow. A light haze still hangs over the rye, and the town wall is a long grey line beneath a sky that is slowly shifting from pearl to a pale, washed blue. The crows are already on their branch, and a third has joined them, the 3 black shapes, motionless as cutouts against the light. You drink from the ladle, the water cool and tasting faintly of the oak barrel, and you let the rest of the day stretch out before you in your mind, like a length of clean linen. When you return to the draining board, the 3 hides have shed most of their loose water and lie in dark, glistening folds, their surfaces slick and slippery. You take the first hide by 2 corners and lift it, and the weight of it is considerable, the lime having swollen the fibers so that the skin is thicker and heavier than it will be once it dries. You carry it 2-handed, holding it away from your apron so that the drips fall on the ground rather than on you, and you walk to the wooden frame that stands at the open side of the shelter. The frame is a simple construction of 4 posts and a crossbar, with a slatted platform just below it, and the whole thing is tilted at a shallow angle so that any runoff will drain back toward the pit along a shallow gully you dug years ago and have maintained ever since. You drape the hide over the top bar, letting it hang down on both sides, and you arrange the folds so that no part of the skin is bunched or trapped. Then you step back and check that it hangs straight, and the hide swings very slightly, a slow pendulum motion that gradually dies into stillness. You bring the second hide and hang it beside the first, leaving a hand's breadth of space between them so that the air can move freely. The third hide joins them, and now the frame holds 3 heavy, wet skins that glisten in the growing light, each one a map of the animal it came from, though the hair is mostly gone now, and the outlines are softened and abstract. The lime water runs down in slow, clear rivulets that catch the light and look for a moment like molten glass before they drip onto the slatted platform and seep through into the gully below. The sound of the dripping is soft, a chorus of tiny, irregular notes that merge into a gentle, watery murmur, and you stand listening to it for a while, as you have stood listening on so many other draining days. The pit still holds 4 hides, and you return to it with the hook. The 4th hide is deeper down and takes a little more searching to find a good hold, the iron tip scraping softly against the stone before it catches the edge of the skin. You work it up through the water, and as it breaks the surface, you see that a few patches of hair still cling stubbornly to one corner, dark tufts against the pale, swollen grain. You note this without concern. Those patches will come away easily on the beam when you scrape, and a few stray hairs are nothing to worry over. The hide joins the others on the draining board, and you lay it out flat this time, smoothing the wrinkles with your palm so that the water can sheet off evenly. The cold of the lime water seeps into your hand, and when you lift it away your palm is pale and slightly wrinkled, the skin soft from the alkaline touch. The morning moves on in this same quiet rhythm, hooking, lifting, carrying, hanging, pausing, returning. The 5th and 6th hides come out of the pit without resistance, and by the time they are on the frame the sun is well clear of the alders, and the first real warmth is beginning to gather in the air. You feel it on the back of your neck, a gentle spreading heat that contrasts with the cool dampness of the hides, and you shift your stance slightly so that you are working partly in the shade of the shelter roof. The last hide is always the trickiest because it lies flat against the stone bottom of the pit, and the hook can catch on the rough stone if you are not careful. You lower the tool with extra patience, feeling your way until the tip slides under the hide's edge, and then you lift with the slow, even pull that experience has taught you. The hide rises, trailing a cloud of fine lime sediment that swirls in the water like a slow-motion storm, and then it is free and the pit is empty. You carry the last hide to the board and let it drain for a while, sitting on the bench while the water runs out of it. The lime pit, now uncovered and empty, reflects the sky perfectly, a rectangle of pale blue surrounded by grey stone, and you can see the bottom clearly, a smooth bed of stone with a few small rounded pebbles that have found their way in over the years. The empty pit will be cleaned tomorrow, the spent lime scooped out and fresh quicklime slaked for the next batch of hides. But for now it is just a quiet basin full of sky, and you look at it with the same calm attention you give to everything here. When the last hide is drained enough, you hang it with the others on the frame. Now all 7 hides are draped over the crossbar, a long row of heavy, dripping skins that move only when a breath of wind stirs them. The frame creaks once, a soft wooden sound that settles into silence, and you run your eye along the whole row, checking that each hide hangs without twisting, and that none are touching where they should not. You adjust one that has slipped a little at one corner, pulling it gently back into place, and you tuck a fold that was trapping water, releasing a small cascade that runs down into the gully and away. The hides are now in the hands of the air and the sun, and you have only to wait. The waiting is a part of the work that cannot be hurried, and you settle into it with the same patience that you bring to the turning and the stirring. You fetch your food bundle and sit on the bench, eating slowly, while the dripping continues its soft, unending music. The rye bread tastes of the oven, the cheese of the dairy, and you chew each mouthful thoroughly, letting the flavors unfold without hurry. A wren flits into the shelter, perches on a rafter for a few seconds, and then darts away again, its small body a flicker of brown and pale cream. The crows have left their branch, and the sky is empty except for a single, motionless cloud that hangs above the hills like a stationary ship. After eating, you take up the wooden paddle and walk to the lime pits, though only the second and third pits still hold hides. You uncover them and stir each one gently, noting that the hair in the second pit is beginning to loosen in the same way it did in the first, small patches of pale skin appearing where the dark hair has started to lift. The third pit is still fresh and sharp, and the hides there will need many more days. You cover them again, weighting the linen with the stones, and then you return to the shelter where the draining hides await your next attention. You take the scrap of coarse cloth from your apron string and begin to wipe down the draining board, removing the slick residue of lime and protein that has coated the wood. The cloth moves in slow circular motions, and the wood comes clean in pale, dry streaks. You work your way along the whole board, rinsing the cloth in the water bucket from time to time, and when you are done, the board is ready for the next draining day. You hang the cloth over the edge of the bucket to dry, and you pour the dirty water onto the ground, where the earth is already white and packed hard. The hides on the frame have slowed their dripping now, the rivulets thinning to occasional, reluctant drops that hang at the lowest corners, swelling slowly until their own weight pulls them free. You walk along the road, touching each hide lightly to feel how much water it still holds. They are cool and slippery, and your fingers leave faint prints that fade almost instantly. In another hour or two, they will be dry enough that you can begin the unhairing, but not yet, and so you find other small tasks to fill the space between now and then. You go to the lime bin and take down the wooden mallet that hangs beside it. The quicklime in the bin is a heap of pale chalky lumps, some the size of your fist and others smaller, and you select a few of the larger ones and place them in an iron bucket. With the mallet you break them into smaller pieces, not crushing them to powder, but reducing them to the size of hazelnuts, because that is the size that slakes best when the water is added. The mallet makes a dull, muffled sound as it strikes the lime, a sound without echo that the open air swallows at once. You work slowly, pausing to check the size of the pieces and to push the bucket a little farther into the shade, so that the sun does not heat the iron too much. When you have enough broken lime, you set the bucket aside for tomorrow's slaking and brush the white dust from your hands. The afternoon sun has now shifted the light from pale yellow to a deeper, dustier amber, and the shadows of the shelter posts have stretched across the ground like long fingers pointing toward the brook. You look up and see that the high cloud has been joined by others, a loose flock of small round puffs that drift slowly eastward, their shadows moving across the meadow in silent procession. One of these shadows passes over the draining frame, and the hides darken for a moment as if a shutter is being closed, then brighten again as the shadow moves on. You watch the cloud shadows travel across the town wall, across the rooftops, across the distant hills, and the slow sweeping motion is as calming as the dripping of the water. You return to the frame and check the hides again, and this time you decide they are ready for the first repositioning. You lift each hide in turn and refold it so that a different section hangs lowest, because the water will have gathered in the folds, and a fresh arrangement will let it drain more completely. The hides are lighter now, still heavy but no longer sodden, and they handle more easily, the lime having softened them so that they drape over your arms like thick, cool cloth. You work your way along the row, and each hide receives the same careful attention, the same unhurried folding and smoothing, until all 7 are hanging again in new positions. The day has moved past its midpoint and is now gliding slowly toward evening, though evening is still far off. You wash your hands in the water bucket, scrubbing them with a handful of clean sand to remove the last of the lime, and then you dry them on a fresh cloth from the shelf. The skin of your fingers is white and puckered from the long contact with the alkaline water, but you know it will return to normal by morning, as it always does. You sit on the bench, your back against the shelter post, and you let your eyes rest on the row of hanging hides, each one a pale, glistening sheet that moves only when a breeze stirs, and each movement is a slow, underwater wave that travels across the surface and dies at the edge. The light continues to change, the amber deepening into a warmer, honeyed tone, and the dust in the air catches the low sun and hangs in golden motes that drift without direction. The hides take on a warmer cast as well, their grey-white surfaces touched with a faint, rosy glow that will fade as soon as the sun drops behind the hills. You watch this transformation with the same quiet attention you have given to every small change throughout the day, and you feel the slow satisfaction of work that is proceeding exactly as it should. When the sun is low enough that the shadows have crossed the meadow entirely and are climbing the town wall, you rise and go to the frame for the last check of the day. The hides are now nearly dry on the surface, their edges beginning to curl very slightly, and you know that by morning they will be ready for the beam. You do not need to do anything more. The night air will finish the work, and the lime that remains in the fibers will continue its slow, gentle action. You leave the hides hanging, and you walk to the pits to make sure the covers are secure on the second and third pits, pressing the stones down firmly. The crow returns to its branch as if it has been waiting for this exact moment, and you nod to it without thinking. A small, silent greeting that is part of the evening ritual. You gather your tools. The hook goes back on its peg, the mallet beside the lime bin, the cloth spread to dry. You rinse the paddle one last time and hang it in its place, and you pour the day's waste water onto the white ground where it will soak in and leave another layer of pale dust. Then you stand at the edge of the working ground and look back at the frame, where the 7 hides hang in a quiet row, catching the last light of the day like a line of pale banners. They are still, heavy, patient, and they hold within them the memory of the lime pit and the promise of the tanning liquor that is still to come. You turn toward the cottage, your steps slow and even, and the evening air is cool and clean and full of the scent of grass and distant wood smoke. The day of drawing and draining is complete, and the next day's work waits quietly in the dark. The morning light finds the shelter before it finds the pits, slipping under the thatch in long, pale fingers that touch the hanging hides and make them glow a soft, creamy white. You arrive with the paddle still in your hand from the first stirring of the second and third pits, and you set it aside as you step into the shade. The 7 hides from yesterday's draining hang motionless on the frame, their surfaces now dull rather than glistening, the last of the free water having evaporated into the night air. They are still cool to the touch, still heavy with the moisture that the lime has bound into the very fibers, and when you press a thumb into the nearest one, it yields with a slow, spongy resistance that tells you the skin is swollen, but no longer sodden. The hair, where it remains, lies flat and dark, loosely rooted and ready to let go. You lift the first hide down from the frame, folding it once over your arms, and the weight of it settles against your chest like a sleeping child. The beam waits at the center of the shelter, a long curve of oak mounted on 2 sturdy legs, its upper surface worn to a glassy smoothness by the passage of countless hides and the steady friction of the blunting knife. The wood is the color of old honey, where the lime has not bleached it, and along the working face there is a shallow concave hollow that fits the curve of a hide as neatly as a cupped hand. You drape the hide over the beam grain side up and arrange it so that the spine line of the animal runs along the crest, the edges hanging down on either side. The hide conforms to the curve without resistance, and you smooth it flat with both palms, working from the center outward, pressing out any air pockets or wrinkles that might catch the knife. The blunting knife hangs on its peg at the end of the beam, and you take it down now with the same unthinking familiarity that you might reach for a door latch. It is a simple tool, a curved iron blade set into a worn wooden handle that your grip has shaped over the years, the grain of the ashwood dark where your fingers wrap around it and pale where they do not. The blade is dull by design, its edge rounded rather than sharp, because its purpose is not to cut, but to push, to scrape, to lift away the loosened hair and the thin grey epidermal layer, without damaging the grain of the hide beneath. You run a thumb along the edge to check for any nicks or burrs, finding none, and then you settle your stance with your feet planted wide and your weight balanced, the knife held in both hands with the blade angled slightly away from you. The first stroke begins at the top of the hide near where the animal's neck would have been, and you draw the knife downward with a steady, even pressure that comes from your shoulders, more than your arms. The blade meets the hair and the grey, slimy layer of spent epidermis, and it pushes them ahead of it in a soft rolling wave that gathers volume as it moves. The sound is a low, wet shushing, not sharp, but muffled, like a broom over damp stone, and the hair comes away in a dark, tangled mass that curls over the edge of the blade and falls onto the packed earth at your feet. Behind the blade, the true surface of the hide appears, clean and pale and smooth. The grain, a fine network of tiny pores that catches the light, like the surface of new parchment. You pause at the end of the stroke, lift a knife, and use your free hand to wipe the blade clean of the clinging debris, flicking it into the pile that is already beginning to grow on the floor. You reposition your hands and begin the next stroke, overlapping the first by a finger's breadth, and again the hair rolls up before the blade. The motion settles into a rhythm almost at once, a slow, deliberate cadence that has no hurry in it. The knife travels down, you lift and clean, you move the blade a little to the side and you draw it down again. Each stroke is a single unbroken sweep, and between strokes there is a small pause where you breathe and check the surface. The pile of scrapings grows, a soft, grey-brown mound of hair and lime paste that smells of wet animal and clean mineral, and from time to time you nudge it aside with the toe of your clog so that it does not build up under the beam. The light through the open side of the shelter moves across the beam as the morning advances, a slow golden bar that creeps from the far end toward your hands. You notice it without looking up, a warmth that travels across the hide and touches your knuckles, and then it has passed and you are in the shade again. The crow calls once from the ash tree, a single rough note that hangs in the air and fades, and a sparrow flits through the shelter, its wings a dry rattle in the thatch. These are the only sounds besides the steady shush of the knife and the soft thump of the scrapings hitting the ground, and they blend into the quiet without disturbing it. Halfway down the hide you stop to re-wet the surface where it has begun to dry in the moving air. You dip a cloth into the water bucket, wring it out once, and wipe it over the unworked portion, and the moisture darkens the hair and softens the remaining lime paste, so that the knife will glide more easily. The water drips from the hide onto the beam and runs in small rivulets down the curved sides, and you wipe those away with the same cloth before they can reach the ground. Then you take up the knife again and resume the stroke, and the dampened hair lifts even more readily, peeling away in long continuous rolls that hold together like wet wool. The hide yields its hair in stages, and you work your way across the whole width from one side to the other, the clean, pale grain spreading behind the blade like a slow tide. Where the hair is most stubborn near the edges, where the skin was thicker and the lime did not penetrate as deeply, you use a little more pressure and a shorter stroke, working the blade in small, patient arcs until the last dark tufts release. The feel of the knife changes as the hair comes away. On the unclean surface it drags slightly, a soft, gritty resistance, and on the cleaned grain it slides with a smooth, almost silky glide that tells you the epidermis is gone and only the true dermis remains. You test this with your fingertips, running them over the boundary between the two textures, and the clean side is cool and firm and just slightly tacky, the texture of living skin that has been stripped of its outer layer. When the first hide is fully scraped, you lift it from the beam and carry it to a second frame at the back of the shelter, where it will hang and begin to dry while you work on the others. You drape it carefully, smoothing out the folds, and then you return to the beam and take down the next hide from the draining frame. This one is from a younger animal, the skin thinner and more delicate, and you adjust your pressure accordingly, letting the weight of the knife do more of the work and your arms less. The hair on this hide comes away in smaller, finer rolls, and the surface beneath is almost translucent at the edges, a pale, even white that will tan to a soft, supple leather good for small pouches and the linings of shoes. You note this without words, just a quiet recognition that adds itself to the store of knowledge you carry. The morning deepens, and the angle of the light shifts until it falls directly on the beam, warming the oak and making the cleaned hides glow. You work through the third hide and then pause to drink from the ladle, the water cool and faintly woody, and you pour a little over your hands to wash away the accumulated paste before drying them on your apron. The pile of scrapings has grown large enough that you gather it up with a wooden scoop and carry it to the waste pit, where you dump it onto the heap of old hair and fleshings, and the crows will pick through it later for anything that might feed them. You return to the shelter, pick up the knife, and take down the fourth hide from the frame. The motion of scraping becomes a kind of meditation, the same stroke repeated so many times that it ceases to be a series of separate actions and becomes one long, continuous flow that occupies your body while your mind drifts free. You think of nothing in particular. Your awareness rests on the texture under the blade, the sound of the hair peeling away, the slow progress of the clean surface spreading across the grain. The sun climbs to its zenith. The shadows shrink to dark pools directly beneath the posts, and a single white butterfly passes through the shelter, pausing on the edge of the beam for a moment before it flutters away across the meadow. You follow it with your eyes and then return your gaze to the hide, and the knife has been moving all the while, guided by a memory that lives in your hands. By the time the fifth hide is on the beam, the day has reached its warmest point, and you feel a trickle of sweat on your temple that you wipe away with your sleeve. You loosen the neck of your tunic and drink again, and you eat a few bites of bread and cheese standing, the food bundle unwrapped on the bench. The cheese is soft from the heat, the bread dry and crumbling, and you chew slowly while you look at the work still to be done. 2 hides remain on the draining frame, and then the beam will need cleaning. The knife will need a wipe of oil, and the scraped hides will need to be checked for any missed patches. But none of this is urgent, and you finish your meal at the same pace you do everything else. The 6th hide is the largest of the batch, a heavy bull hide that feels more like a slab of wood than a skin, and it takes all your strength to lift it onto the beam. You adjust your stance, plant your feet more firmly, and begin the scraping with a deeper, slower stroke that uses the full length of your arms. The hair comes away in thick, coarse rolls, and the surface beneath is tough and dense, the grain deeply textured with the marks of the animal's life, small scars, a few scratches, the subtle variations in thickness that map the shoulders and the flanks. The knife complains with a faint, gritty sound as it moves, and you stop often to clean the blade, wiping it on the cloth and then continuing. The work is heavier, but it is not harder. It only asks more time and more patience, and you give both without resentment. The 7th and last hide is a relief after the bull hide, lighter and easier, and you scrape it with a gentle, almost tender attention, knowing that it is the final one of the day. The light has mellowed now, the harsh noon brightness giving way to the softer gold of the late afternoon, and the shadows have stretched out again, longer and thinner than before. The knife moves across the last unplaned corner, the last tuft of hair lifts away, and then the hide is bare and smooth from edge to edge. You run your hand over the whole surface, checking for any roughness, and you find none. Then you lift it from the beam and carry it to the frame with the others, where the 7 scraped hides hang in a row, their colors ranging from cream to pale ivory, each one a blank page that the tanning will write upon. You clean the beam with a bucket of fresh water and a stiff brush, scrubbing away the residue of lime and protein until the oak shows its natural honey color again. The water darkens and you tip it onto the ground where it soaks into the white dust. The blunting knife you wipe with an oiled rag, working the oil into the iron to keep the rust away, and then you hang it back on its peg. The pile of final scrapings goes into the bucket, and then to the waste pit, and the floor of the shelter is swept with a bundle of twigs until the packed earth is clean and even. You wash your hands and arms in the water barrel, scrubbing with sand, and the cool water soothes the slight ache that has settled into your shoulders from the day's work. The sun is low now, touching the tops of the alders, and the sky in the west is a wash of pale orange and soft violet that deepens as you watch. You stand at the edge of the shelter, looking at the row of cleaned hides, and you feel the quiet satisfaction of a task completed. The hides will rest now, drying slowly in the night air, and tomorrow you will return them to the lime for the second soaking, the step that will further soften and purify the fibers. But that is tomorrow, and tonight there is only the stillness of the evening and the slow fading of the light. You gather your things, the empty food cloth, the water ladle, and you walk the path back to the cottage as the first stars begin to show in the east. The crows have left their branch, and the meadow is silent except for the whisper of the breeze in the rye. Your body is tired, but it is a clean, honest tiredness that settles into your bones like a familiar weight, and by the time you reach your door the last light has gone from the sky and the world is a deep, quiet blue. You go inside, and the beam and the knife wait in the darkness of the shelter, patient and still, ready for the next tide and the next day. The morning after the unherring arrives without wind, the air so still that the smoke from the town chimneys rises in straight, unbroken columns. You walk to the shelter before the sun has cleared the alders, your clogs leaving dark prints in the dew-soaked grass. The 7 scraped hides hang on the frame where you left them, their surfaces now dry and stiff, the pale grain taut like parchment stretched on a drum. When you press a fingertip against one, the skin gives a slight leathery resistance, no longer spongy, but not yet hard. And the lime that still lives in the fibers has left a fine white bloom on the surface that brushes off at your touch like dust from a moth's wing. These hides are ready for the second bath, a fresh lime liquor that will complete the opening of the fibers and carry away the last impurities. You fetch the iron bucket of broken quicklime from the corner of the shelter, the pieces you prepared the day before, now dry and cool, and you carry it to the empty first pit. The pit has been cleaned, the old lime scooped out and spread on the waste ground, and the stone bottom is bare except for a few small pebbles and a skim of dried lime scale that flakes away when you run the edge of the paddle over it. You set the bucket down and go to the water barrel, filling 2 large wooden pails and carrying them one by one to the edge of the pit. The water sloshes gently, a soft liquid sound that is the only noise in the whole meadow. Now comes the slaking. You pour the first pail of water into the empty pit, and then you begin adding the lumps of quicklime, not all at once but a few at a time, dropping them into the shallow water with a careful, steady hand. The lime hisses on contact, a low, sizzling sound like fat on a hot stone, and a thin steam begins to rise, carrying the sharp, dusty smell of calcium oxide transforming. You step back a little, watching the lumps crack and swell and begin to crumble, the water around them turning cloudy and then milky, the heat of the reaction warming the air above the pit so that it shimmers faintly. The lime breaks apart on its own, falling into a fine white powder that stirs in the water, and you use the paddle to gently agitate the mixture, smoothing out the lumps and ensuring the slaking spreads evenly. Steam continues to rise for a while, and then it slows and stops, and the pit holds a thick, creamy slurry that smells clean and mineral and faintly hot. You add more water, pail by pail, stirring with the paddle between each addition, and the slurry thins into a proper lime liquor, the color of watered milk, the surface smooth and opaque. You test the strength with the egg and the string, lowering the egg into the pit until it floats freely, and you measure the exposed shell against the mark you keep on the string. The circle is just the right size, a small coin of white above the surface, and you know the liquor is balanced, strong enough to work, but not so caustic that it will damage the hides. You lift the egg out, rinse it in the water bucket, and return it to its clay cup. Now the hides. You take the first one down from the frame, stiff and cool, and you carry it to the pit. You lower it in slowly, feeding it under the surface hand over hand, and the lime liquor closes over it with a soft gulping sound. The hide sinks part way and then floats, the trapped air in its fibers giving it buoyancy, and you use the paddle to push it down gently until it settles beneath the surface, a pale shape in the milky water. The second hide goes in beside it, and you arrange them so that they lie flat and even, not folded or crumpled, their grain sides smooth and their flesh sides rough. One by one, you lower all 7 hides into the fresh lime bath, and each entry sends slow ripples across the surface that bump against the stone edges and fade. When the last hide is submerged, you use the paddle to settle them all, pressing down any corners that try to rise, and then you step back and look at the pit. The liquor is still, opaque, the hides invisible beneath, and the steam has stopped entirely. You fold the linen cover back over the pit, laying it smooth and weighting the corners with the stones, and the waiting begins. This waiting is the heart of the tanner's rhythm, a stretch of days when the lime does its work, and you have only to tend, to check, to pass the hours in small, quiet occupations. You stand at the edge of the covered pit and feel the stillness settle around you, and then you turn to the other pits, the second and third, which still hold their own hides in older liquors. You uncover each one, stir gently with the paddle, check the hair on the hides in the second pit where it is now loose and slipping in dark wet plumps, and then you cover them again. The third pit is unchanged, its hide still firm, its liquor still sharp. These checks take only a little while, and then you are left with the open day and the wide empty sky. The morning stretches out, and you find the first of the small tasks that will fill the waiting hours. The wooden bucket that you use for carrying waste water has developed a split along one stave, a thin dark crack that leaks a slow drip when the bucket is full. You carry the bucket to the bench and sit with it between your knees, turning it over to inspect the damage. The split runs from the top rim down to the middle band, and it is just wide enough to let water through. You go to the pile of scrap wood behind the shelter and find a thin strip of ash that has been drying for months, pale and straight-grained, and you trim it with a small knife to the width of a finger. Then you soak the strip in the water bucket until it is pliable, and you work it carefully into the crack, tapping it home with the flat of the mallet, not hard enough to split the stave further, but enough that the wood seats firmly. You trim the ends, smooth the patch with a piece of coarse stone, and then you fill the bucket from the barrel and watch. No drip. You empty the water onto the ground and set the bucket in the sun to dry, and the repair will hold for another season. The sun climbs higher, and the day warms. You take a length of rope from its hook, a coil of hemp that has become stiff and tangled from disuse, and you carry it to the open ground in front of the shelter, where you have room to work. You uncoil the rope, stretching it out along the white earth, and you walk its length slowly, examining the fibers for any frayed spots or broken strands. The rope is sound, just stiff and kinked, and so you begin the slow process of recoiling it properly. You work from one end, looping the rope in your hand in even, unhurried circles, and with each loop you run your palm along the length to smooth out the twists. The hemp is rough and dry, smelling of dust and old tar, and it leaves a faint scratchy feeling on your skin. The coil grows layer by layer, neat and tight, and when the whole rope is coiled, you tie it with a short piece of twine and hang it back on its hook, ready for the day when you will need it to lash a cover or haul a bundle of bark. Midday comes quietly, the sun directly overhead, the shadows vanished. You eat your bread and cheese on the bench, and you watch a line of ants making their way across the packed earth near the shelter post, each one carrying a tiny pale grain, a parade so small and orderly that it seems like the earth itself is moving. When you finish eating, you walk to the lime bin and take a handful of the quick lime lumps, turning them over in your palm. The quick lime is heavy and chalky, and it leaves a white dust that you brush off against your apron. You check the bin's cover to be sure it is tight and that no dampness has crept in, because dampness will spoil the quick lime, and then you secure the leather flap with a stone. The egg test calls you back to the first pit in the early afternoon. You uncover a corner just enough to lower the egg, and you watch it float in the fresh liquor, the shell showing the same small circle as this morning, which tells you the lime is holding its strength. The hides beneath have only been soaking a few hours, and they will not need stirring until tomorrow, but you dip the paddle in anyway and give the water a single, slow rotation, just to feel the weight of the liquor and to know that the hides are still free and not settled on each other. Then you cover the pit again and go to the oak bark pile. The bark pile sits under its own small lean-to beside the shelter, a mound of dark, rough slabs that you gathered in the early spring when the sap was rising and the bark peeled easily from the felled oaks. The pile has weathered over the summer, drying and curing, and now it smells sweet and astringent, a deep, woodsy scent that is the promise of the tanning to come. You pull out the slabs one by one and examine them, sorting by size and thickness. The thickest pieces you set aside for the bottom of the tanning vat, where they will release their tannins slowly, and the thinner, more brittle pieces you break into smaller chunks with your hands, the bark snapping with a clean, dry sound. You work through the whole pile, turning it over, removing a few twigs and a dried leaf, and then you restack it in a new order, the larger pieces at the bottom and the smaller on top, ready to be ground when the time comes. The bark dust clings to your hands and you rinse them in the water bucket, watching the dark stain wash away. The afternoon drifts toward evening with the same slow, even pace. You walk the stone path that leads from the cottage to the pits, a path you have walked so many times that you know every stone. Some of the stones have shifted over the winter, pushed up by the frost, and you stoop to reset them, wiggling each one back into its bed of earth and pressing it firm with your heel. Where the path edges have crumbled, you scrape loose soil back into place with the side of your clog. Then you take the bundle of birch twigs that leans against the cottage wall, and you sweep the path from end to end, the twigs scratching softly on the stones, lifting the dust and the small debris into a thin cloud that settles behind you. The sweeping takes a long time, and you do it slowly, covering every inch, and when you are done the path is clean and straight and the stones are a pale grey against the green of the grass. Evening comes, and you make the final round of the pits. You uncover the first pit and stir the hides gently with the paddle, feeling the resistance of the water and the soft, heavy weight of the skins. The lime liquor has cooled now, the warmth of the slaking long gone, and it is the same temperature as the earth. You cover the pit, check the second and third, and then you stand at the edge of the working ground looking out over the meadow. The sun is low, the light golden, and the town wall is a long dark line against the bright sky. The gate is still open, and a single cart trundles out, small and distant, disappearing down the road that leads to the next village. You watch it go, and then you turn back to the cottage. The next day is the same, and the next. The waiting days blend into each other, a gentle procession of mornings and evenings marked only by the small rituals of checking and tending. Each day you uncover the first pit and stir the hides, and each day the hides feel a little softer, a little more pliable, the lime working its way into every fibre. The egg test shows the strength of the liquor slowly diminishing, the exposed shell growing larger by a fraction each time, and when the circle is too wide, you know it will be time to add a little fresh lime to revive the bath. But that day is not yet. You mend a loose thatch on the shelter roof, tying in fresh straws with a long strip of bark, your hands working above your head while the sun warms your back. You sharpen the edge of a wooden stake on a rough stone, not for any urgent purpose, but because it is dull, and you may need it one day. You coil another rope, sweep the path again, sort through a pile of scrap leather for pieces that can be used as ties or patches. You watch the clouds form and dissolve, the birds come and go, the light change from morning gold to noon white to evening amber. You sit on the bench and do nothing at all, your hands resting on your knees, your breathing slow and steady, while the lime pits hold their silent, patient work beneath the linen covers. On the fourth day of the second soaking, you notice that the hides in the first pit have reached the softness you are looking for. When you press your thumb into a corner of the topmost hide through the lime water, the skin yields with a plush, velvety give, and the hair roots that remained after the unhurrying are now completely dissolved. The lime has done its work, and the hides are ready to be rinsed. You make this judgment without hurry, and you decide that tomorrow you will draw them out and take them to the brook. But tonight there is still the covering, the weighing of stones, the last quiet look across the darkening meadow, and the slow walk home under a sky that is deepening from pale blue to a soft, star-scattered indigo. The waiting days are ending, but the night is still, and the lime pits dream in the dark. The morning you have chosen for the rinsing is bright and still, with a sky that wears a single color from horizon to horizon, a pale, washed blue, so even it looks like the inside of a bowl. You take down the bundle of limed hides from the draining frame, where they have hung since yesterday afternoon, and you fold them over your arm one by one, making a stack that is heavy and cool and slightly slippery. The lime has left them with a faint soapy texture, the fibers swollen and soft, and they smell of wet stone and clean earth. You wrap the whole bundle in a length of coarse linen, tying it with a leather cord, and then you hoist it onto your shoulder. The weight settles into the familiar groove between your neck and your collarbone, and you begin the walk down to the brook. The path to the brook is a narrow, grassy track that branches off from the main path near the alder grove and winds down a gentle slope toward the lowest part of the meadow. You have walked it many times, and your feet know every undulation. The slight rise where the ground is sandy and dry, the softer dip where a spring seeps under the grass and keeps the earth moist even in high summer, the place where the path narrows between two old hawthorns and you must turn sideways to pass without catching your bundle on the thorns. The hawthorns are in leaf now, small dark green ovals that flutter without sound, and a few late blossoms still cling to the branches, white and fading. You ease past them, your bundle brushing the bark, and the path opens out again onto the gentle slope that leads to the water. The brook is not a dramatic thing, not a rushing torrent or a deep, dark stream, but a shallow, slow-moving ribbon of water that winds through the common land at the edge of the town's territory. Its banks are low and grassy, with patches of soft mud where cattle sometimes come to drink, though there are none today. The water is clear, the color of weak tea where it runs over a pebbly bottom, and it makes a quiet, continuous sound that you begin to hear long before you reach it, a gentle, liquid murmur that is not so much a noise as a texture in the air. You stop at the top of the last slope, shift in the bundle on your shoulder, and you look at the brook for a moment before you descend. A heron stands motionless in the shallows downstream, a grey statue on long, thin legs, and the water flows around it without disturbing its perfect stillness. You walk down to the bank and choose a spot where the water is wide and shallow, with a flat, gravelly bed that will keep the hides off the mud. You lay the bundle on the grass and untie the cord, and then you unfold the linen and take out the first hide. It is cool and heavy, the lime water still dripping from it in small milky beads, and you carry it carefully into the brook. The water is colder than the air, cold enough that it makes you draw a short breath when you step in, but your feet are protected by wooden clogs, and the cold is only a distant, refreshing shock. You wade out a few steps, the water rising to just below your knees, and you lay the hide flat on the surface. It floats for a moment, pale and ghostly, and then it sinks slowly, settling onto the gravel bed with a soft, undulating motion like a fallen leaf in a pond. You arrange the hide so that it lies flat and unwrinkled, and then you weigh back to the bank for the next one. Each hide receives the same treatment, the careful carry into the water, the lowering, the smoothing of the folds. You place them side by side, leaving a hand's breadth between each, so that the current can move freely around them, and as you work, the lime begins to leach out of the hides in pale, cloudy wisps that swirl downstream and dissolve. The water carries the lime away without hurry, threading it into the main flow where it thins and vanishes, and the hides become a little brighter, a little cleaner, with each passing minute. When all 7 hides are in the water, you return to the bank and fetch the small sack of smooth stones that you brought for weighing. The stones are river rocks that you gathered long ago and have used many times, each one rounded and grey and about the size of a small loaf. You carry them into the brook, 2 at a time, and you place one on each corner of the hides, pressing them down just enough to keep the current from lifting the edges. The stones hold the hides firmly against the gravel, and the water flows over them in a thin, even sheet that ripples very slightly where it passes over the thicker folds. You step back and check that all is secure, adjusting one stone that is tilted, and then you wade to the bank and climb out, your clogs dripping, the hems of your leggings dark with water. You find a flat rock a little way up the bank, a wide, sun-warmed slab of grey stone that juts out over the grass like a natural seat. You sit down, your back against the gentle slope, and you let your gaze rest on the brook. The sound of the water fills the air, a soft, layered murmur that is made of many smaller sounds. The gurgle of a tiny eddy where the current divides around a submerged branch, the faint hiss of the flow over the gravel, the occasional plink of a drop falling from an overhanging leaf. The heron has not moved. It stands on one leg now, the other leg tucked up under its body, and its eye is a dark bead that seems to look at everything and nothing. Dragonflies skim the surface, their wings a blur of blue and green, and they pause now and then to hover above the hides as if curious about these pale, strange shapes in their stream. You sit without moving, your hands folded in your lap, and the morning passes over you like the shadow of a cloud. The sun is warm on your shoulders, and the rock is warm beneath you, and the combination of warmth and the cool sound of water makes a gentle, drowsy peace that asks nothing. You watch the hides in the brook, their outlines wavering under the flowing water, and you see that the lime is still leaching out, the wisps of white now thinner and more intermittent. Where the water runs over the hides, it catches the light in a particular way, a slight milky iridescence that moves and shifts like the skin of a bubble, and then it clears as the lime disperses. The hides themselves are slowly changing color, from the grey-white of the lime bath to a cleaner, creamier white, the color of new-turned wood. After a time, you rise and wade back into the brook to turn the hides. You lift the stones off the corners, stack them on the bank, and then you take the first hide and flip it over, laying the grain side down against the gravel and the flesh side up to the flow. The flesh side is rougher, with a slightly fibrous texture that the water will scour clean, and you smooth it flat before replacing the stones. You work your way along the row, turning each hide, and the water that runs off your hands is cold and clean, the lime smell now faint and distant. When all the hides are turned, you return to your rock and sit again, and the brook continues its work. The sun climbs toward noon, and the light changes from pale gold to a brighter, clearer white. The meadow behind you is waking up. A few bees move through the clover, their bodies heavy and dark, and a skylark rises from the grass somewhere out of sight, climbing and climbing until its song is a distant, silvery thread that hangs in the sky without seeming to come from anywhere. You look up and try to find the bird, but the sky is empty and the song is everywhere, a scattered music that seems to be part of the light itself. Then the song stops, and the skylark drops back into the grass as suddenly as it rose, and the silence that follows is almost as beautiful. You watch the brook, and you think about nothing. The water flows, the hides soak, the heron stands, and the minutes fall away like leaves from a tree that is never bare. You notice that the current has brought a small brown leaf into the shallows. It circles in an eddy near the bank, spinning slowly, and then it catches the main flow and is carried away downstream, past the heron and around the bend, gone. Another leaf follows, and another, a small fleet of autumn remnants, though it is not yet autumn, and you watch each one until it disappears. When the sun is directly overhead, you eat your meal on the rock, the bread and cheese, and a handful of dried apples that you brought in a small cloth. The apples are sweet and chewy, and they taste of the sun that dried them. You drink from the brook, cupping the water in your hand and lifting it to your mouth, and it is cold and tastes of moss and stone and the long journey from the hills. You pour a little over your neck, and the coolness runs down under your tunic and makes you shiver once, a pleasant, quick shiver that is gone as soon as it comes. The afternoon begins, and you return to the brook to turn the hides again. This time you lift them out one by one and hold them in the current, letting the water run over the surface and carry away any last traces of lime. You rub the flesh side gently with your palm, not scrubbing but smoothing, and the water loosens a few small particles of lime that drift away like fine dust. The hides feel different now, softer and more supple, the swollen stiffness of the lime giving way to a pliable, velvety texture that is the first hint of the leather they will become. You lay them back in the water, grain side up this time, and you replace the stones with the same careful placement. The heron has finally moved. You look up and see it taking a slow, deliberate step through the shallows, its head cocked, and then it freezes again. A living statue. A moment later its beak stabs downward and comes up with a small silver fish that gleams once before it disappears. The heron swallows, shakes its head once, and resumes its patient watch. You watch the heron, and the heron watches the water, and the brook flows between you both, indifferent and eternal. The hides have been in the water for several hours now, and you judge that they are ready. The lime smell is gone entirely, replaced by the clean, neutral scent of wet hide and river water. You wade in and begin lifting them out, carrying them to the bank and laying them on the grass. Each hide leaves a dark, wet imprint on the blades, and the grass springs back slowly after the weight is removed. You stack the hides as you did before, folding them carefully so that they will be easy to carry, and you tie the bundle with the leather cord. The stones you gather into their sack and set aside for the next rinsing day. You stand on the bank for a moment looking back at the brook. The place where the hides lay is now just a patch of disturbed gravel, already smoothing over as the current redistributes the small stones. The heron has moved upstream, and the dragonflies still skim and hover. The light is beginning to slant toward the afternoon gold, and the shadows of the alders are stretching down the slope to touch the water's edge. You hoist the bundle onto your shoulder, the weight now somewhat lighter because the hides have shed their lime and much of their water, and you start the walk back up the path. The climb is gentle but steady, and you take it slowly, pausing once at the hawthorns to shift the bundle, and once at the top of the slope to look back at the brook, which is now a thin silver line curving across the green. Then you walk on, past the alder grove and along the edge of the rye field, where the grain is turning gold at the tips and rustles softly in the first stirrings of an evening breeze. The town wall appears on your right, the gate still open, and you can hear the distant sounds of the day ending, the lowing of cattle, the ringing of the smithy hammer slowing, the creak of the town well's windlass. You pass your cottage, and you carry the bundle, the last few steps to the shelter. You lay the rinsed hides on the draining board to shed any remaining water, and you spread them out so that the air can move over them. They are clean and pale and soft, and they look entirely different from the dark, hairy things you first lowered into the lime pit weeks ago. You run your hand over the nearest one, feeling the smooth, cool surface, and you know that the next step will be the fleshing, the final scraping that will prepare them for the tanning. But that is for tomorrow or the day after, and tonight you have only to cover the pits, wash your tools, and walk the short path home. You do these things in the same slow, methodical way you do everything. You stir the second and third pits, cover them, weight the stones. You rinse the paddle and the hook, hang them in their places, wipe the draining board clean. The sun touches the hills and spills its last light across the meadow, a warm golden wash that makes the white lime dust look like ground pearl. You turn toward the cottage, your steps slow and even, and the rinsed hides rest in the shelter, their long journey almost complete, while the brook continues to flow in the darkening distance, carrying its quiet song into the night. The morning after the rinsing is warm and heavy, the kind of morning when the air seems to hold its breath, and every sound is muffled by the thickness of the humidity. You walk from the cottage with the rinsed hides still stacked on the draining board where you left them the evening before, and when you arrive at the shelter you find them just as you left them, cool and damp and clean, their surfaces now a uniform pale cream, with no trace of the grey lime. The hides have lost the slippery soapy feel of the lime bath and have taken on a soft, matte texture that feels almost like cloth, and they are lighter now, the water weight mostly gone, though a faint cool dampness still clings to the inner fibers. You lift the first hide and drape it over your arm, and it folds with a gentle pliable drape that is nothing like the stiff, heavy slabs you first pulled from the pits. The beam for fleshing is a different beam from the one you used for unhairing, wider and flatter, with a gentler curve that allows the hide to lie almost horizontal. It is mounted on the same kind of sturdy legs, but the working surface is broader, more like a low table than a curved arch, and the wood is a darker color, stained by years of contact with animal fats and the oils from the fleshing knife. You carry the first hide to the beam and spread it out, flesh side up, smoothing the wrinkles with both hands until the skin lies flat and even, the edges hanging down over the sides. The flesh side is the underside of the skin, the part that was once against the animal's body, and it is rougher than the grain side, with a thin layer of connective tissue, small traces of blood vessels, and patches of fat that the lime has loosened but not removed. This is what the fleshing knife will take away. The fleshing knife hangs on its own peg, separate from the blunting knife, and you take it down now. It is a two-handled tool, a long flat blade with a handle at each end, and the blade is curved in a shallow arc that matches the motion of your arms as you draw it across the hide. The edge is sharp, not dull like the unhairing knife, because this knife must cut away the unwanted tissue without damaging the true skin beneath. You test the edge with your thumb, feeling the fine, clean bite of the steel, and then you settle the blade against the hide near the top edge, holding the handles with both hands, your arms straight and your shoulders relaxed. The first stroke is a slow, steady pull toward your body, the blade angled just enough to slice under the layer of membrane without digging into the dermis. The sound is a soft, whispering rasp, like a fine-toothed saw drawn through dry wood, and the blade peels away a thin, translucent sheet of tissue that curls up ahead of the edge and then separates, falling onto the beam beside the hide. Behind a blade, the clean surface appears, slightly darker than the grain side, with a fine, velvety texture that shows the true quality of the skin. You pause at the end of the stroke, lift the blade, and use a scrap of cloth to wipe the edge clean of the sticky residue. Then you reposition your hands and begin the next stroke, overlapping the first by the width of a finger. The motion settles into its own unhurried rhythm almost immediately, the blade traveling the length of the hide in a continuous sweep, then the lift, the wipe, the slight shift of the hands, and the next sweep. Your body sways a little with each stroke, a gentle rocking movement that comes from the shoulders and the hips, and your breathing falls into the same steady pattern as the knife. The beam creaks very softly each time you apply pressure, a faint wooden sound that is more felt than heard, and the hide shifts slightly on the smooth wood, a small, slow adjustment that you correct with a press of your palm before the next stroke. The flesh side yields its unwanted layer in stages, and you work methodically from one end of the hide to the other, the cleaned area spreading steadily across the surface. The tissue you remove is not uniform. In some places it is thin and almost transparent, peeling away like the skin of a grape, and in other places, near the edges where the animal's fat deposits were thicker, it is denser and more opaque, with a greasy yellowish color that clings to the blade and requires more frequent wiping. You pause now and then to scrape the accumulated matter from the blade with a flat piece of wood that you keep for this purpose, and the small waxy curls of fat and membrane fall into the growing pile at your feet. The morning light moves slowly across the shelter, and the beam is positioned so that the sun falls on your hands while you work, warming the skin and making the steel of the blade glint with a soft silver light. The air under the thatch is still and close, smelling of wet leather and the faint animal richness of the fleshings, and a few flies have found their way in, drawn by the scent. They circle lazily, their buzzing a low, intermittent drone that rises and falls, and from time to time one lands on the edge of the beam and you brush it away with a flick of your finger before it can settle on the hide. You work through the first hide with the same patient, unvarying tempo, and when the last patch of membrane has been scraped away, you run your hand over the entire surface, feeling for any roughness. The flesh side is now smooth and even, the texture like fine velvet, and it is slightly moist, cool to the touch. You lift the hide from the beam and carry it to the clean frame at the back of the shelter, where you drape it carefully, flesh side out, to begin drying. Then you return to the beam and take the next hide from the stack, spreading it out and smoothing it as before. The second hide is from a different part of the same batch, and it has its own character, a little thinner near the center, with a small scar near one edge where the animal must have scraped against something long ago. The scar has healed clean, leaving only a faint, raised line that you feel under the blade as a slight resistance, a tiny bump that the knife passes over without catching. You work around it carefully, adjusting the angle of the blade so that you remove the membrane without cutting into the scar tissue. And the motion is so practiced that you do this without pausing, the adjustment automatic, your hands knowing what to do without your mind telling them. The pile of scrapings grows at your feet, a soft grey-yellow mound that gives off a mild organic smell, not unpleasant, but earthy and rich, like the smell of freshly turned soil mixed with a hint of tallow. From time to time you nudge the pile aside with the side of your clog so that it does not build up under the beam and obstruct your stance, and the scrapings shift with a soft, moist sound, sticking together in clumps. A small beetle, black and shiny, investigates the edge of the pile, its antennae waving, and then it moves on, disappearing into a crack in the packed earth. The fleshing continues through the mid-morning and into the afternoon, the hours marked only by the changing angle of the sunlight and the slow, steady accumulation of cleaned hides on the frame. You stop once to drink from the ladle, the water cool against your throat, and you pour a little over your hands to wash away the greasy residue that has built up on your fingers. You dry your hands on the coarse cloth, and then you resume, the knife fitting back into your grip as if it had never left. The pile of scrapings grows, the hides on the frame multiply, and the beam creaks its soft wooden creak with each stroke, a sound as familiar and comforting as your own breathing. The third hide is the thickest of the batch, the hide of an older animal, and it takes more work to clean. The membrane layer is tougher, more fibrous, and it requires a slightly steeper angle on the blade and a firmer pull. You shift your stance, planting your feet a little wider for better leverage, and you draw the knife with a slow, powerful stroke that engages the muscles of your back and shoulders. The blade sings a different note on this hide, a lower, rougher rasp, and the tissue comes away in thicker, coarser strips that curl like wood shavings. You work this hide in shorter sections, pausing more often to clean the blade and to rest your arms, but you do not hurry, and the hide yields eventually, the last of the tough membrane peeling away to reveal the same smooth, velvety surface beneath. After the third hide, you pause for a longer rest, sitting on the bench with your back against the shelter post. The afternoon has grown warm, the sun now directly overhead, and the air under the thatch is heavy and drowsy. You eat the last of the bread and cheese, and you drink deeply from the water ladle, letting the coolness spread through your chest. The crows are on their branch, silent and still, and a single cloud, small and white and perfectly round, hangs motionless above the town wall. You watch the cloud, and you let your mind go blank, the way it often does during the long repetitive hours of fleshing, and when you rise to resume the work, you feel refreshed, the brief rest having smoothed the small aches from your muscles. The fourth and fifth hides pass under the blade with the same slow, steady pace, and the differences between them are subtle and small. The fourth has a slight discoloration near one flank, a faint yellowish patch that is nothing to worry over, and the fifth is almost perfect, the flesh side coming clean with very little effort, the membrane lifting in long continuous sheets that barely cling to the knife. You work these hides with a light touch, letting the sharpness of the blade do the work, and the sound of the scraping is softer now, a gentle, shushing whisper that blends with the buzz of the flies and the distant murmur of the town. The sixth hide brings a small surprise, a tiny embedded thorn that has been hidden in the flesh layer since the animal's life, a dark, hard point that you discover when the blade catches on it with a soft metallic click. You stop at once, examine the area, and use the tip of the knife to work the thorn free, a small black sliver that you flick into the scrapings pile. Then you continue, and the blade moves on without further interruption. By the time you begin the seventh and last hide, the afternoon light has shifted to its late golden phase, and the shadows of the shelter posts have stretched long and thin across the ground. The air is still warm, but a slight breeze has risen, stirring the thatch and carrying the scent of dry grass and distant wood smoke. You spread the last hide on the beam, flesh side up, and you take a moment to look at it before you begin. A pale, clean skin, the last of the batch, waiting patiently for the final touch. Then you lower the knife and start the first stroke, and the rhythm picks up again, the same slow sway, the same soft rasp, the same gentle lift and wipe. The last hide yields its membrane as readily as the first did, and the blade travels from end to end in smooth, unhurried sweeps that gradually cover the entire surface. When the final stroke is done, you lift the blade and wipe it clean, and then you run your hand over the last hide, feeling the smooth, clean flesh side. It is cool and dry to the touch, the texture uniform and soft, and it joins the others on the frame, the 7 hides now hanging in a neat row, their flesh sides facing outward like a row of pale silent faces. You step back and look at them, and you feel the quiet satisfaction of another step completed, the hides now fully cleaned and prepared for the next stage. The cleaning of the tools comes next, a ritual as old as the work itself. You take the fleshing knife to the water bucket and wash it carefully, using a cloth to wipe away every trace of fat and membrane, and then you dry it with a clean rag and apply a thin coat of oil from the small clay pot on the shelf. The oil soaks into the steel, darkening it, and you hang the knife back on its peg with the blade facing the wall. The beam you wipe down with a damp cloth, removing the residue of the day's work, and the scrapings pile you gather up with the wooden scoop and carry to the waste pit, where you dump it on top of the earlier scrapings from the unherring. The crows will find it, and what they do not take the earth will slowly reclaim. You sweep the floor of the shelter with a bundle of twigs, working the packed earth smooth, and you empty the water bucket onto the white ground. Then you stand at the edge of the shelter, looking out over the meadow, where the light is now a deep, rich gold, and the shadows are long and blue. The town gate is still open, but the sounds from within have quieted to a low evening murmur, and the sky in the west is beginning to show the first hints of color, a wash of pale orange and soft pink that deepens even as you watch. The hides hang still on the frame, their flesh sides pale in the fading light, and you know that they will rest now, drying slowly until you are ready for the baiting. That will come soon, a gentle soak in a warm, mild ferment that will soften them further and prepare the fibers for the tanning. But tonight there is only the quiet, the cool evening air, and the slow walk back to the cottage along the familiar path. Your body tired in the best way, your hands smelling faintly of leather and oil, while the beam and the knife wait in the darkness of the shelter for the next day and the next tide. The morning comes with a soft grey light that filters through the thatch of the shelter and finds you already at the baiting vat, a wide, shallow tub of oak that sits on a low stone platform at the edge of the working ground. This vat has been unused for weeks, and its wood is dry and pale, the staves held tight with iron bands that show a fine orange bloom of rust where the damp has touched them. You run your hand over the rim, feeling the smooth, worn edge, and then you take up a bucket of clean water and pour it slowly over the inside, letting the wood drink. The water darkens the oak and begins to swell the fibers, closing any tiny gaps between the staves, and a few drops leak through at first, then stop as the wood tightens. You pour a second bucket, then a third, until the water stands in the bottom of the vat without draining away, and then you tip the vat to empty it, the water splashing onto the white earth with a sound like a small wave. The bait itself is a simple thing, a mild, living ferment made from the dung of dogs that has been aged and dried until it is crumbly and light, its sharpness mellowed by time into a gentle, earthy mildness. You keep a small store of it in a covered clay crock behind the shelter, and you fetch this crock now, carrying it two-handed to the vat. The crock is cool and heavy, its lid sealed with a piece of oiled linen, and when you lift the lid, the smell that rises is not foul, but dark and loamy, like the floor of a forest where leaves have been composting for a season, with a faint, sour note that is not unpleasant. You take a handful of the dried dung and crumble it between your fingers. It breaks apart easily, releasing a fine brown dust that drifts in the still air, and the texture is dry and fibrous, like old peat. You measure out the bait by feel, scooping handfuls into a large wooden pail until the pail is a third full. Then you carry the pail to the fire pit, where a small, tidy fire of alder wood has been burning since you first arrived. Its flames now settled into a bed of glowing coals that radiate a steady, even heat. An iron cauldron of water hangs from a tripod over the coals, and the water is just beginning to shiver with the first tiny bubbles that cling to the iron sides. You pour the contents of the pail into the cauldron, and the dried dung floats for a moment, a dark, crumbly raft, before it begins to absorb the water and slowly sink, the pieces softening and dissolving, turning the water a cloudy brown like weak tea. You stir with a long wooden paddle, slow circular motions that help the bait break down and release its fermenting agents into the water, and the smell deepens, becoming richer and more alive, a warm yeasty scent that rises with the steam. The temperature of the bait is important, not too hot to damage the hides, but warm enough to wake the fermentation, a gentle heat that you test by dipping your elbow into the cauldron, because the skin of the elbow into the cauldron, because the skin of the elbow is more sensitive than the hand. The water feels warm but not hot, a comfortable bathing warmth that makes your skin tingle slightly, and you judge it to be right. You lift the cauldron from the tripod using a thick cloth to protect your hands, and you carry it slowly to the baiting vat, the dark liquid sloshing gently, steam curling from the surface. You pour the bait into the vat, and the liquid spreads out, filling the tub with a cloudy brown pool that reflects the pale sky in a distorted, wavering way. You add more warm water from a second cauldron, thinning the bait until it is the color of stream water after a rain, a translucent amber brown, and the smell is now fainter, a mild, earthy fragrance that hangs in the air around the vat. The hides are waiting, the 7 cleaned and fleshed skins that have been resting on the drying frame. You take them down one at a time, and they are stiff now, not hard, but firm, the fibers tightened by the drying and the lime. The first hide you lower into the bait, pushing it under the surface with the paddle, and the warm liquid closes over it with a soft, gulping sound. The hide absorbs the bait slowly, darkening as the water penetrates the fibers, and you watch it settle just below the surface, a pale shape in the brown liquid. The second hide goes in beside the first, and then the third, and you arrange them so that they lie flat, not overlapping, each one fully submerged. The remaining hides follow, and soon the vat holds all 7, their outlines visible through the cloudy water like stones at the bottom of a shallow pond. You stir the vat with the paddle, a gentle circular motion that makes the hides shift and the bait swirl around them, and as you stir, the first tiny bubbles begin to appear, small silvery spheres that rise slowly from the hides and break at the surface with a faint effervescent hiss. These bubbles are the sign that the bait is working, the mild fermentation beginning to soften the fibers and carry away the last traces of lime, and you watch them with a quiet, satisfied attention, counting the seconds between each rise. The hissing sound is so soft that you must lean close to hear it, a gentle, fizzy whisper that seems to come from the liquid itself, and it is joined by the occasional faint pop of a larger bubble breaking. The smell of the bait changes subtly as the fermentation awakens, a slight yeasty sharpness mingling with the earthy base, and you note this as well, though it requires no action. The sun is now well up, and the morning warmth has begun to lift the chill from the air. You leave the vat and walk to the bench, where you sit with your back against the shelter post, your paddle resting across your knees. The baiting will take several hours, and during that time you have only to wait, to watch, and to stir the vat now and then, keeping the bait moving and the hides exposed evenly to the ferment. The bench is comfortable, its wood worn smooth, and you settle into the stillness, letting your eyes rest on the vat and the slow, intermittent rise of the bubbles. The morning passes in this gentle, undemanding way. The bubbles continue to rise, a steady, silent procession that never hurries, and the hides in the vat shift slightly with each stir, their shapes softening as the bait penetrates deeper. You stir the vat 4 times, at intervals that you measure by the sun's movement, each stirring a slow, rhythmic circling that lasts for a minute or two, and then you return to the bench and sit. The crow is on its branch, and a second crow has joined it, their dark shapes motionless against the brightening sky. A light breeze stirs the thatch, making a faint, rustling sound that blends with the hiss of the bait, and a single small cloud drifts slowly across the sun, dimming the light for a moment before it passes. You eat your midday meal on the bench, the bread and cheese and a few early blackberries that you picked from the hedge on your walk this morning, their skins dark and their taste sweet tart on your tongue. You drink from the water ladle, and you pour a little water over your hands to clean them before you touch the hides again. The day is warm now, the sun high in the air still, and the baiting vat gives off a faint, steady warmth of its own, the fermentation generating a gentle heat that you can feel when you hold your palm above the surface. This warmth is a good sign, telling you that the bait is active and healthy. In the early afternoon you stir the vat again, this time lifting each hide part way out of the liquid to check its texture. The first hide you lift is noticeably softer than it was this morning, the stiffness gone, replaced by a supple, pliable feel that allows the skin to drape over your hands like a heavy wet cloth. You press a fold between your fingers, and the hide compresses easily, the fibers yielding without resistance, and when you release it, the fold stays for a moment before slowly relaxing. This softening is the purpose of the bait, the mild enzymatic action that cleans and opens the skin without weakening it, and you are satisfied. You lower the hide back into the vat, and you check the others in turn, each one showing the same gradual transformation. The 7th hide, which was the thickest and most resistant during the fleshing, is still slightly firmer than the rest, and you leave it a little longer in the bait, positioning it at the center of the vat where the warmth is most even. The afternoon hours stretch out, long and golden, and the gentle repetitive nature of the baiting allows your mind to drift. You sit on the bench and listen to the sounds of the distant town, the faint ring of the smithy hammer, the occasional call of a child, the creak of the well-windlass. These sounds are far away, softened by distance in the open air, and they come to you as a kind of quiet music, a human murmur that is as much a part of the landscape as the bird song and the wind. The sheep on the hills beyond the meadow add their own note, a distant plaintive bleating that rises and falls, carried on the breeze when it shifts. You watch the clouds, the slow drift of their shadows across the rye field, and you think about nothing in particular. Your mind is still and calm as the surface of the bait between stirrings. Late in the afternoon, when the light has begun to slant toward the golden, you notice that the bubbles in the vat have slowed, the fermentation gradually exhausting itself as the bait spends its strength. The hissing is now very faint, just an occasional whisper of escaping air, and the liquid has cleared slightly, the suspended particles settling to the bottom in a fine, silty layer. This tells you that the bait has done its work, and the hides are ready to be removed. You rise from the bench and stretch your arms once, feeling the pleasant looseness in your shoulders from the long sitting, and you walk to the vat. You lift the first hide out of the bait, and the brown liquid drips from it in long amber strings that catch the light and fall back into the vat with a soft patter. The hide is soft and pliable, entirely transformed from the stiff, lime-swollen skin it was, and it has a warm, clean, earthy smell that is the smell of the bait itself. You carry it to a clean draining board that you have set up beside the vat, and you lay it flat, smoothing out the wrinkles so that the excess liquid can run off. The second hide follows, and the third, and soon all 7 are laid out on the draining board, their surfaces dark with moisture, the fibers relaxed and open. You empty the spent bait into a shallow pit that you have dug at the edge of the working ground, a pit that will slowly drain into the earth, the nutrients returning to the soil. The liquid pours out in a brown stream, the silt swirling, and it soaks into the ground quickly, leaving a dark, damp patch that will dry and fade by tomorrow. You rinse the vat with clean water from the barrel, scrubbing the sides with a stiff brush, and the water runs away clear. You turn the vat upside down to dry, its wooden bottom pale and clean. The hides on the draining board have shed most of the loose liquid, and you carry them one by one to the drying frame, where you hang them carefully, leaving space between each for the air to circulate. They hang there, dark and soft and heavy, their surfaces glistening faintly in the late afternoon light, and they will dry slowly overnight, the last of the bait evaporating and leaving the fibers clean and ready for the tanning. You run your hand over the nearest hide, feeling the soft, velvety texture, and you know that the baiting has been good. The day is ending, the sun low and orange, and the sky in the east is deepening to a soft, dusky blue. You wash your hands and arms in the water barrel, scrubbing away the traces of the bait, and you clean the paddle and the bucket, hanging them in their places. The crows have left their branch, and the meadow is quiet, the sheep silent now on the darkening hills. You take one last look at the hides hanging on the frame, their shapes dark against the fading light, and then you turn and walk the path to the cottage, your steps slow and even, the day's work complete. The bait has done its gentle work, and the hides rest, dreaming of the oak bark and the tanning liquor that will soon complete their long transformation. The hides have rested overnight after their baiting, and the morning finds them still damp, soft, and pliable, their surfaces cool to the touch and smelling faintly of the clean, earthy ferment. You take them down from the shelter frame one by one, folding each over your arm with care, and you carry them out of the shade into the mild sunlight of the drying field. This field lies just beyond the shelter, a flat, open stretch of grass where a row of simple wooden frames stands like a line of quiet sentinels, their shapes dark against the pale sky. Each frame is a rectangle of sturdy ash poles pegged together at the corners, taller than a man and wide enough to hold a full hide, and they are weathered to a soft, silvery grey that shows the grain of the wood in long, meandering lines. Some of the frames lean slightly from years of standing, their bases settled into the earth, but they are all sound, and they wait for the hides with the patient stillness of things that have been used many times. You lay the first hide on the grass beside the nearest frame and examine the lacing holes that run around the inside edge of the poles. These holes are spaced a hand's breadth apart, each one worn smooth from the passage of countless leather thongs, and through each hole you will thread a strip of thin, pliant leather that will hold the hide stretched tight. You go to the small storage box under the ash tree, where the laces are kept, a tangle of narrow strips cut from old, scrap hides that have been oiled and twisted until they are supple and strong. You take a handful and untangle them with slow, patient fingers, laying them out straight on the grass, and then you return to the frame and begin. Stretching a hide is a slow, methodical art that asks for an even hand and a quiet mind. You lift the first hide and center it within the frame, the flesh side facing outward where the air can reach it, and you adjust its position until the spine line runs straight down the middle and the edges are roughly equidistant from the poles. The hide overlaps the frame on all sides by a few inches, and it is from these overlapping edges that you will lace it into place. You take a leather thong and thread it through one of the corner holes, then through the hide, piercing it with a small sharp awl that you keep in your apron pocket. The awl makes a clean, small hole with a soft popping sound, and you thread the thong through, pull it gently, and tie a simple knot that holds without biting too deep. You move to the next hole, a hand's breadth along, and repeat the action, the awl, the thread, the pull, the knot, each one exactly like the last, a quiet repetition that sets the rhythm of the morning. You work your way around the perimeter of the hide, lacing from corner to corner, and as you go, you apply a gentle, even tension that pulls the hide outward in all directions. The pull is not hard. You do not want to tear the skin or overstretch the fibers, but you want to remove every slack fold and wrinkle until the surface is smooth and taut like the skin of a drum. The hide responds to the tension by stretching very slightly. The fibers aligning themselves under the strain, and the surface becomes flatter and more even with each new lace. You pause often to step back and look at the whole, checking that the tension is uniform, and where a slight dip or wave appears, you loosen a knot and retie it with a little more or less pull. The laces creak softly as they tighten, a faint leathery sound, and the frame settles under the tension with a quiet wooden sigh that seems to come from the poles themselves. When the first hide is fully laced, you walk around the frame, running your palm over the surface. The hide is stretched tight, the texture smooth and cool, and it has a slight springy give when you press on it, like a well-tuned instrument. A few small droplets of moisture have been pressed out by the tension and glisten on the flesh side, catching the morning light, and you wipe them away with a soft cloth. Then you pick up the remaining laces and the awl and move to the second frame, where the next hide waits. The second hide is slightly larger and requires a little more adjustment to center it correctly within the frame. You shift it several times, stepping back to gauge the alignment until the edges are even and the spine line runs true. Then you begin lacing, starting at the top corners this time rather than the bottom, a small variation that makes no real difference but feels right for this particular hide. The awl pierces the skin, the thong threads through, the knot tightens, and the rhythm picks up where it left off. Your hands work steadily, the awl and the thongs moving in a slow, continuous dance, and the sun climbs higher, warming the air and drawing a faint, clean smell of leather and dry grass from the ground. The third and fourth hides go onto their frames in the same way, each one presenting its own small character. One has a slightly thinner edge that requires a gentler pull. Another has an old scar that catches the awl and makes you work around it with smaller, closer laces. You adjust without thinking, your hands responding to the feel of the hide, the resistance of the leather, the tension of the thong. The frames fill one by one, the pale hide stretched across them like blank canvases, and the drying field takes on the look of a small outdoor workshop where the sun and the air are the only tools still needed. By the time the fifth hide is laced, the morning has grown warm, and you feel a light sweat on your forehead. You pause to drink from the water skin that hangs on a peg of the ash tree, and you pour a little water over the back of your neck, the coolness running down under your tunic. Then you sit for a moment in the shade of the tree, your back against the rough bark, and you look out over the frames. 7 hides, 4 already stretched, 3 still waiting on the grass, and the sun moving in a slow arc above them. The ash tree rustles very softly, its leaves a dark green canopy that filters the light into shifting golden coins on the ground, and a light breeze passes through the field, making the stretched hides tremble slightly, a gentle, rippling motion that travels across their surfaces like a breath on water. You return to the work, lacing the 6th hide with the same steady patience, and then the 7th. The last hide is the thickest of the batch, and it takes more strength to pull it taut, the laces digging into your fingers as you draw them tight. You work slowly, using the weight of your body to add tension, and you tie the final knots with extra care, checking each one twice. When the last lace is secured, you step back and look at the whole row of frames, 7 hides all stretched and even, their surfaces smooth and pale, the laces dark against the light skin, the wood of the frame silver grey in the sun. The sight is a quiet, satisfying one, a sense of order and completion that asks nothing more of you than to wait. The waiting is the longest part of the drying, and you settle into it with the same calm that you bring to all the other waiting days. You walk along the row of frames, checking each hide for any slackness that may have developed as the fibers relax into the stretch. On the 3rd frame you find a lace that has loosened slightly, the knot slipping, and you retie it with a firmer hand, pulling the hide taut again. On the 5th frame, near the bottom corner, a small fold has formed where the hide was not quite even, and you loosen 3 laces, smooth the fold with your palm, and retie them, working the hide flat. These small adjustments are part of the drying, and you make them without hurry, your hands moving in a slow, careful rhythm. The sun is high now, the light strong and clear, and the warmth is a steady, comforting weight on your shoulders. You walk to the ash tree and sit down in the shade, your back against the trunk, your legs stretched out on the cool grass. The frames stand before you, the hides slowly drying, their surfaces already beginning to lighten as the moisture evaporates. The breeze, when it comes, is light and warm, carrying the scent of the meadow flowers and the distant sweet smell of the oak bark pile. You close your eyes for a moment, and the world becomes a pattern of light and shadow behind your lids, the gentle rustle of the leaves, the soft hum of a bee somewhere nearby. When you open your eyes again, nothing has changed except that the shadows have moved a little farther along the grass. You spend the early afternoon in this way, rising from time to time to walk around the frames, to touch the hides, to feel the texture as they dry. The flesh side is drying fastest, its rough, fibrous surface exposed to the air, and it has taken on a pale, matte finish that feels warm and dry to the touch. The grain side, which faces inward where the air moves less freely, is still slightly cool and damp, and you turn the frames slightly, angling them so that the breeze can reach the inner surfaces, making a mental note to reverse them again later. The frames are light enough to shift without much effort, though they are heavy with the tension of the hides, and you move each one a few degrees, the wooden bases scraping softly on the grass, leaving dark, flattened patches where they had stood. In the mid-afternoon, when the sun has begun its slow descent but the heat is still strong, you return to the shade of the ash tree and sit with your back against the bark, your hands folded on your lap. You eat a small late meal of bread and dried apples, the apples sweet and chewy, the bread crumbling slightly from the dry air, and you drink the last of the water from the skin. The stretched hides are now noticeably drier, their color fading from dark cream to a pale, even ivory, and they have taken on a slight, papery stiffness at the edges where the laces hold them, though the centers are still pliable and cool. You know that they will need to dry slowly, not too fast, because a hide that dries too quickly will become brittle and crack, while a hide that dries too slowly may sour. The steady, moderate warmth of the afternoon, tempered by the occasional breeze and the shade of the ash tree, is exactly right. You rise and do another circuit of the frames, this time loosening a few laces very slightly on the thicker hides to allow the centers to dry more evenly without pulling too hard on the edges. You also check that no insects have settled on the hides. A fly sometimes lands and you wave it away with a gentle motion, the back of your hand brushing the air. Then you sit again, and the afternoon stretches on, long and golden and still. The light begins to change, the gold deepening into a warmer amber hue, and the shadows of the frames stretch out across the grass like long thin fingers. The breeze picks up a little, a steady gentle flow that makes the stretched hides hum very softly, a low barely audible vibration that you feel more than hear. You listen to it for a while, the sound of drying leather, the song of the stretched fibers, and it blends with the rustle of the ash leaves and the distant fading sounds of the town. The world is settling into evening, and the drying hides are settling into their final form, the shape that will hold through the tanning and the finishing and the long years of use. You gather the remaining laces and the awl, return them to the storage box, and take one last walk along the row of frames. Each hide is now nearly dry, the surface smooth and firm, the tension still holding, the color a uniform, pale ivory. You press a thumb gently into the center of the last hide and feel a slight resilient give. It is not yet fully dry, but it is close, and the night air will finish the work. You leave the frames as they are, turn slightly to catch the last of the sun, and you stand for a moment looking at them, the 7 hides stretched like quiet, patient flags, their long journey from the lime pits almost at an end. The sun touches the hills and spills its final light across the drying field, a warm golden wash that makes the ash tree glow, and the hides gleam like polished bone. You walk slowly back to the cottage, the grass soft under your clogs, and the evening air is cool and clean. Behind you the frames stand in a row, holding their stretched hides against the darkening sky, and the breeze moves among them, singing its low, leathery song into the quiet night. The last morning of the cycle comes with a sky that is pale and clear, the blue so thin it seems almost white near the horizon. You wake to the sound of the first birds, the same soft, questioning calls that have greeted every dawn since the hides first went into the lime, and you rise with the slow, unthinking habit of a body that knows its own rhythm. The walk to the drying field takes you past the shelter, where the tools hang in their usual places, and past the lime pits, their covers still weighted with stones, the second and third pits still holding their patient hides. The grass is dry this morning, the dew already evaporated in the early warmth, and the path is firm under your clogs as you approach the row of frames beneath the ash tree. The hides have dried through the night, and they hang on their frames with a new stillness. The stretched surfaces now firm and smooth, the color a uniform, pale ivory that catches the low sunlight and holds it like a thin layer of wax. You walk along the row, touching each hide with the flat of your hand, feeling the texture. The flesh side is dry and velvety, no longer cool or damp, and when you press your thumb into the center of the nearest hide, it resists with a slight, springy give that tells you the fibers are set but not brittle. The grain side, which is faced inward toward the frame, is equally dry, the surface tight and even, the natural pattern of the pores visible as a fine, subtle grain that will take the tanning liquor well. These hides are ready to come down. You fetch the small knife from the shelter, a short, sharp blade that you use for cutting laces, and you begin at the first frame. The laces have dried as well, their leather stiff and unyielding, and you cut through each one with a quick, careful stroke, the blade slipping under the thong with a soft, parting sound. As each lace is severed, the hide releases a tiny amount of tension, a faint, whispering creak that travels across the surface, and the edges curl inward very slightly, no longer held by the frame. You work your way around the perimeter, cutting the laces one by one, and when the last one is free, you lift the hide from the frame, gathering it in your arms. It is light now, the water weight entirely gone, and it has a stiff, papery feel that will soften again in the tanning vat. You carry it to the shelter and lay it flat on the clean stone table, smoothing it with your palm, and then you return to the field for the next. The second hide comes down as easily as the first, the laces parting under the knife, the skin lifting away from the wood. The frame stands empty, a pale rectangle against the sky, and you move along the row, cutting and gathering, each hide a quiet, familiar weight in your arms. The third hide is slightly thicker and has dried with a more pronounced curl at the edges, but it is otherwise sound, and you handle it with the same care. The fourth, fifth, and sixth hides join the growing stack on the stone table, their surfaces pale and clean, the faint earthy smell of the bait still lingering beneath the drier scent of stretched leather. The seventh hide, the last and thickest, requires a little more attention because the laces have bitten deeper into the edges where the tension was greatest, and you ease the knife under each thong with extra care so as not to nick the skin. When it is free, you carry it to the shelter and lay it on top of the stack, and then you stand back and look at the 7 finished hides, their long journey from the lime pits now complete. The morning is still young, the sun not yet halfway to its peak, and you have before you the quiet task of storing the hides and closing down the working day. You begin by trimming the lacing holes from the edges of the hides, the small pierced circles that would otherwise leave weak spots in the finished leather. You use a sharp, flat knife and a wooden straight edge, cutting a narrow strip from each side, the blade moving in a slow, steady line that follows the curve of the hide. The offcuts fall onto the table in thin, pale ribbons, and you gather them into a basket for later use as ties or small patches. The trimmed hides are now neat rectangles of clean, dried leather, their edges straight and even, their surfaces unmarked except for the natural grain. You stack the hides one on top of another, aligning the edges carefully, and the stack is about the height of your hand from the table. The weight is solid, the individual hides pressing together with a soft, papery friction, and you carry the stack to the small store shed that stands behind the shelter. The shed is a simple structure of timber and thatch, its door a heavy plank that lifts on leather hinges, and inside it is cool and dark and smells of old leather, dry wood, and the faint, sweet tang of oak bark. A row of wooden shelves lines the back wall, and you place the stack on the middle shelf, where the air can circulate and the hides will stay dry until you are ready to tan them. You close the door and slide the wooden latch into place, and the hides are now at rest. The empty frames in the drying field still need attention. You walk back out with a coil of spare laces and a mallet, and you move from frame to frame, checking the joinery. The ash poles have weathered another season, and a few of the corner pegs have worked loose, the wood shrinking in the dry air. You tap each peg back into place with the mallet, the blow soft and precise, and where a peg is too worn, you pull it out and replace it with a new one from the small store under the ash tree. The new pegs are pale and rough, and you trim them to fit with a few strokes of the knife before tapping them home. The frames, now solid and ready, will stand empty until the next batch of hides comes out of the bait, and you leave them as they are, the wood silver grey against the green of the field. Back at the shelter, you turn your attention to the tools that have served you through this long cycle. The blunting knife, the fleshing knife, the hook, the paddle, the awl, the lacing knife. Each one needs cleaning, drying, and oiling before it is hung in its place. You fill a bucket with clean water and begin with the blunting knife, washing the blade carefully, using a cloth to remove every trace of dried lime and hair. The water darkens, and you tip it onto the white earth before refilling the bucket for the fleshing knife. The blade of the fleshing knife is still faintly greasy from the membrane scrapings, and you scrub it with a handful of sand until the steel is bright and clean. You rinse it, dry it with a soft rag, and then apply a thin coat of oil from the clay pot, working the oil into the metal with slow circular motions. The oil darkens the steel to a deep glossy grey, and you hang the knife on its peg with the blade facing inward. The hook needs little more than a wipe with an oiled cloth, its iron tip already dark with age. The paddle you wash and dry, the wood pale and smooth, and you hang it in its place against the shelter post. The awl you sharpen with a few light strokes on the whetstone before oiling and returning to the small leather pouch that hangs from your apron string. The lacing knife gets the same careful treatment, the short blade sharpened and oiled, the handle wiped clean. Each tool receives the same unhurried attention, the same quiet ritual of care, and by the time you are finished, the shelter is in perfect order, every tool gleaming and ready for the next cycle. The lime pits call you now, the second and third pits where hides still soak. You uncover them one at a time, folding the linen back and weighting the stones, and you stir each pit with the paddle. The second pit holds hides that are nearly ready, the hair slipping easily, the lime liquor a pale, exhausted grey. You test a corner with the hook and see the clean, white grain beneath, and you note that in another few days these hides will be ready for the unhairing beam. The third pit is still fresh, the liquor sharp and strong, the hides firm and dark. You stir it gently, settle the hides, and cover both pits again, pressing the stones into place. The cycle is continuous, and even as one batch rests in the shed, another is nearing completion, and a third is just beginning. The rhythm never truly ends, it only pauses for the night. The afternoon has arrived while you worked, the sun now past its peak and sliding slowly toward the hills. You eat the last of your food on the bench, the bread and the small wrinkled apple from the storage crock, and you drink deeply from the water ladle. The crows have come back to their branch, 3 of them now, their dark shapes silent and still, and the meadow beyond is a wash of green and gold under the slanting light. A single hawk circles high above the brook, its wings motionless, riding a thermal that is invisible from the ground. You watch it for a while, the slow, effortless turning, and then you rise and begin the final tasks of the day. The draining board needs scrubbing, its surface coated with a fine residue of lime and bait and dried hide fibers. You work at it with a stiff brush and water, the bristles making a soft, rhythmic scratching that blends with the sounds of the afternoon. The water runs off in grey rivulets, and the oak beneath emerges clean and pale, the grain smooth from years of use. You dry the board with an old cloth and leave it tilted against the shelter wall to air. The stone table where you stack the hides gets the same treatment, scrubbed clean and wiped dry, and the floor of the shelter you sweep with the birch twigs, moving the dust and small debris out into the open air where the breeze will carry it away. The packed earth is smooth and even, the same floor that has been swept 1,000 times before. You walk to the waste pit and turn the pile of scrapings with a fork, mixing the old hair and fleshings with the newer material, helping it to break down into the earth. The smell is rich and organic, the smell of returning, and a few beetles scurry away as you disturb their home. You smooth the pile flat and leave it to the crows and the weather. Then you return to the water barrel, check the level, and note that it will need refilling soon, though not today. The barrel is still half full, the water cool and clear, and you replace the lid and set the ladle on top. The lime bin you check last, lifting the leather cover and peering at the chunks of quicklime inside. There is enough for the next slaking, though you will need to gather more from the kiln before the moon is full. The quicklime is dry and powdery, its sharp mineral scent rising to meet you, and you let the cover fall back into place and weight it with a stone. Everything is in order, everything is ready, and the working ground settles into its evening stillness like a creature bedding down for the night. The sun is low now, the light a deep golden amber that makes the white lime dust glow and the thatch of the shelter look like spun honey. You take your apron off for the first time today, untying the side strings and lifting the strap over your head, and you hang it on its peg by the door of the cottage. The apron is stiff with dried lime and the memories of the day's work, and it will be there waiting for you in the morning, as it always is. You wash your hands and face in the water bucket by the door, the cool water, a small refreshing shock, and you dry yourself on a clean cloth. Your hands are rough and pale, the skin thickened by the lime, but they are clean, and they smell of leather and oil and the faint, distant trace of the earth. You stand for a moment outside the cottage, looking back toward the shelter and the lime pits and the drying field with its empty frames. The town wall is a dark line against the bright sky, and the gate is still open, though the sounds from within have quieted to a low, peaceful murmur. A single column of smoke rises from the bakehouse, straight and thin, and the smell of wood smoke drifts across the meadow, mixing with the scent of grass and dry earth. The ash tree rustles softly, its leaves dark against the pale sky, and the crows lift from their branch one by one, flapping slowly away toward the brook. The hawk has gone, and the sky is empty except for the first faint star in the east, a single point of light that appears while you watch. You turn and go inside the cottage, closing the door gently behind you. The hearth holds a small bed of embers, still glowing orange and red, and you stir them with a poker and add a few pieces of dry wood. The flames catch quickly, the fire waking up with a soft crackle, and the warmth spreads into the room, filling the corners with a gentle flickering light. You sit on the stool by the hearth, your hands resting on your knees, and you let the warmth soak into your tired muscles. The day is over, the cycle complete, and the hides rest in the shed, pale and quiet, waiting for the next step of their long transformation. Tomorrow you will rise and walk the same path, uncover the same pits, take up the same tools. The second pit will yield its hides, and you will draw them and scrape them and rinse them and stretch them, the same patient round that has filled every day of your working life. But tonight the everys and the fives and incrediculdes and the soft deep stillies of the evening, you sit and watch the flames, and the world outside settles into the blue darkness of the night, and the lime pits sleep under their linen covers, and the brook flows on, and the ash tree stands silent in the field, and all is calm, all is still, all is exactly as it should be.